Chapter 61. The Cabaret of the Image de Notre Dame. At 2 o'clock the next day 50,000 spectators had taken their position upon the place, around the two gibbets which had been elevated between the Quai de la Grève and the Quai Pelletier, one close to the other, with their backs to the embankment of the river. In the morning also, all the sworn criers of the good city of Paris had traversed the quarters of the city, particularly the Halles and the faubourgs, announcing with their hoarse and indefatigable voices the great justice done by the king upon two speculators, two thieves, devourers of the people. And these people, whose interests were so warmly looked after, in order not to fail in respect for their king, quitted shops, stalls, and ateliers, to go and evince a little gratitude to Louis XIV, absolutely like invited guests, who feared to commit an impoliteness in not repairing to the house of him who had invited them. According to the tenor of the sentence, which the criers read aloud and incorrectly, two farmers of the revenues, monopolists of money, dilapidators of the royal provisions, extortioners and forgers, were about to undergo capital punishment on the Place de Grève, with their names blazoned over their heads, according to their sentence. As to those names, the sentence made no mention of them. The curiosity of the Parisians was at its height, and, as we have said, an immense crowd waited with feverish impatience the hour fixed for the execution. The news had already spread that the prisoners, transferred to the Château of Vincennes, would be conducted from that prison to the Place de Grève. Consequently, the Faubourg and the Rue Saint-Antoine were crowded, for the population of Paris in those days of great executions was divided into two categories: those who came to see the condemned pass, these were of timid and mild hearts but philosophically curious, and those who wished to see the condemned die, these had hearts that hungered for sensation. On this day D'Artagnan received his last instructions from the king, and made his adieus to his friends, the number of whom was, at the moment, reduced to Planchet. Then he traced the plan of his day as every busy man whose moments are counted ought to do, because he appreciates their importance. "My departure is to be," said he, "at break of day, 3 o'clock in the morning. I have then 15 hours before me. Take from them the 6 hours of sleep which are indispensable for me, 6, 1 hour for repasts, 7, 1 hour for a farewell visit to Athos, 8, 2 hours for chance circumstances, total 10. There are then 5 hours left. 1 hour to get my money, that is, to have payment refused by M. Fouquet. Another hour to go and receive my money of M. Colbert, together with his questions and grimaces. 1 hour to look over my clothes and arms and get my boots cleaned. I still have 2 hours left. Mordioux, how rich I am." And so saying, D'Artagnan felt a strange joy, a joy of youth, a perfume of those great and happy years of former times mount into his brain and intoxicate him. "During these 2 hours I will go," said the Musketeer, "and take my quarter's rent of the Image de Notre Dame. That will be pleasant. 375 livres. Mordioux, but that is astonishing. If the poor man who has but 1 livre in his pocket found a livre and 12 deniers, that would be justice, that would be excellent. But never does such a godsend fall to the lot of the poor man. The rich man, on the contrary, makes himself revenue with his money, which he does not even touch. Here are 375 livres which fall to me from heaven. I will go then to the Image de Notre Dame, and drink a glass of Spanish wine with my tenant, which he cannot fail to offer me. But order must be observed, Monsieur d'Artagnan, order must be observed. Let us organize our time, then, and distribute the employment of it. Art. First Athos, art. 2d the Image de Notre Dame, art. 3rd M. Fouquet, art. 4th M. Colbert, art. 5th supper, art. 6th clothes, boots, horse, portmanteau, art. 7th and last sleep. In consequence of this arrangement, D'Artagnan went straight to the Comte de la Fère, to whom, modestly and ingenuously, he related a part of his fortunate adventures. Athos had not been without uneasiness on the subject of D'Artagnan's visit to the king, but few words sufficed for an explanation of that. Athos divined that Louis had charged D'Artagnan with some important mission, and did not even make an effort to draw the secret from him. He only recommended him to take care of himself, and offered discreetly to accompany him if that were desirable. "But, my dear friend," said D'Artagnan, "I am going nowhere." "What? You come and bid me adieu and are going nowhere?" "Oh, yes, yes," replied D'Artagnan, coloring a little, "I am going to make an acquisition. That is quite another thing. Then I change my formula. Instead of, 'Do not get yourself killed,' I will say, 'Do not get yourself robbed.' My friend, I will inform you if I set eyes on any property that pleases me, and shall expect you will favor me with your opinion." "Yes, yes," said Athos, too delicate to permit himself even the consolation of a smile. Raoul imitated the paternal reserve. But D'Artagnan thought it would appear too mysterious to leave his friends under a pretense, without even telling them the route he was about to take. "I have chosen Le Mans," said he to Athos. "It is a good country?" "Excellent, my friend," replied the Count, without making him observe that Le Mans was in the same directions as La Touraine, and that by waiting 2 days at most, he might travel with a friend. But D'Artagnan, more embarrassed than the Count, dug at every explanation, deeper into the mud, into which he sank by degrees. "I shall set out tomorrow at daybreak," said he at last. "Till that time will you come with me, Raoul?" "Yes, Monsieur le Chevalier," said the young man, "if Monsieur le Comte does not want me." "No, Raoul, I am to have an audience today of Monsieur, the King's brother, that is all I have to do." Raoul asked Grimaud for his sword, which the old man brought him immediately. "Now then," added D'Artagnan, opening his arms to Athos, "adieu, my dear friend." Athos held him in a long embrace, and the Musketeer, who knew his discretion so well, murmured in his ear, "An affair of state," to which Athos only replied by a pressure of the hand, still more significant. They then separated. Raoul took the arm of his old friend, who led him along the Rue Saint-Honoré. "I am conducting you to the abode of the god Plutus," said D'Artagnan to the young man. "Prepare yourself. The whole day you will witness the piling up of crowns. Heavens, how I am changed! Oh, what numbers of people there are in the street," said Raoul. "Is there a procession today?" asked D'Artagnan of a passer-by. "Monsieur, it is a hanging," replied the man. "What? A hanging at the Greve?" said D'Artagnan. "Yes, monsieur." "The devil take the rogue who gets himself hung the day I want to go and take my rent," cried D'Artagnan. "Raoul, did you ever see anybody hung?" "Never, monsieur, thank God." "Oh, how young that sounds. If you were on guard in the trenches as I was, and a spy. But pardon me, Raoul, I am doting. You are quite right, it is a hideous sight to see a person hung. At what hour do they hang them, monsieur, if you please?" "Monsieur," replied the stranger respectfully, delighted at joining conversation with 2 men of the sword, "it will take place at about 3 o'clock. Ah, it is now only 1:30. Let us step out, we shall be there in time to touch my 375 livres, and get away before the arrival of the malefactor." "Malefactors, monsieur?" continued the bourgeois. "There are 2 of them." "Monsieur, I return to you many thanks," said D'Artagnan, who as he grew older, had become polite to a degree. Drawing Raoul along, he directed his course rapidly in the direction of La Greve. Without that great experience Musketeers have of a crowd, to which were joined an irresistible strength of wrist, and an uncommon suppleness of shoulders, our 2 travelers would not have arrived at their place of destination. They followed the line of the quay, which they had gained on quitting the Rue Saint-Honoré, where they left Athos. D'Artagnan went first. His elbow, his wrist, his shoulder formed 3 wedges which he knew how to insinuate with skill into the groups, to make them split and separate like firewood. He made use sometimes of the hilt of his sword as an additional help, introducing it between ribs that were too rebellious, making it take the part of a lever or crowbar, to separate husband from wife, uncle from nephew, and brother from brother. And all that was done so naturally, and with such gracious smiles, that people must have had ribs of bronze not to cry thank you when the wrist made its play, or hearts of diamond not to be enchanted when such a bland smile enlivened the lips of the Musketeer. Raoul, following his friend, cajoled the women who admired his beauty, pushed back the men who felt the rigidity of his muscles, and both opened, thanks to these maneuvers, the compact and muddy tide of the populace. They arrived in sight of the 2 gibbets, from which Raoul turned away his eyes in disgust. As for D'Artagnan, he did not even see them. His house with its gabled roof, its windows crowded with the curious, attracted and even absorbed all the attention he was capable of. He distinguished in the place and around the houses a good number of musketeers on leave, who, some with women, others with friends, awaited the crowning ceremony. What rejoiced him above all was to see that his tenant, the cabaretier, was so busy he hardly knew which way to turn. 3 lads could not supply the drinkers. They filled the shop, the chambers, and the court even. D'Artagnan called Raoul's attention to this concourse, adding, "The fellow will have no excuse for not paying his rent. Look at those drinkers, Raoul, one would say they were jolly companions. Mordioux! Why, there is no room anywhere." D'Artagnan, however, contrived to catch hold of the master by the corner of his apron, and to make himself known to him. "Ah, Monsieur le Chevalier," said the cabaretier, half distracted, "1 minute if you please. I have here 100 mad devils turning my cellar upside down. The cellar if you like, but not the money box." "Oh, monsieur, your 37.5 pistoles are all counted out ready for you, upstairs in my chamber, but there are in that chamber 30 customers, who are sucking the staves of a little barrel of Oporto which I tapped for them this very morning. Give me a minute, only a minute?" "So be it, so be it. I will go," said Raoul in a low voice to D'Artagnan. "This hilarity is vile." "Monsieur," replied D'Artagnan sternly, "you will please to remain where you are. The soldier ought to familiarize himself with all kinds of spectacles. There are in the eye, when it is young, fibers which we must learn how to harden, and we are not truly generous and good save from the moment when the eye has become hardened, and the heart remains tender. Besides, my little Raoul, would you leave me alone here? That would be very wrong of you. Look, there is yonder in the lower court a tree, and under the shade of that tree we shall breathe more freely than in this hot atmosphere of spilt wine." From the spot on which they had placed themselves, the two new guests of the Image de Notre Dame heard the ever-increasing hubbub of the tide of people, and lost neither a cry nor a gesture of the drinkers, at tables in the cabaret, or disseminated in the chambers. If D'Artagnan had wished to place himself as a vidette for an expedition, he could not have succeeded better. The tree under which he and Raoul were seated covered them with its already thick foliage. It was a low, thick chestnut tree with inclined branches, that cast their shade over a table so dilapidated the drinkers had abandoned it. We said that from this post D'Artagnan saw everything. He observed the goings and comings of the waiters, the arrival of fresh drinkers, the welcome, sometimes friendly, sometimes hostile, given to the newcomers by others already installed. He observed all this to amuse himself, for the 37.5 pistoles were a long time coming. Raoul recalled his attention to it. "Monsieur," said he, "you do not hurry your tenant, and the condemned will soon be here. There will then be such a press we shall not be able to get out." "You are right," said the Musketeer. "Hola! Somebody there. Mordioux!" But it was in vain he cried and knocked upon the wreck of the old table, which fell to pieces beneath his fist. Nobody came. D'Artagnan was preparing to go and seek the cabaretier himself, to force him to a definite explanation, when the door of the court in which he was with Raoul, a door which communicated with the garden situated at the back, opened, and a man dressed as a cavalier, with his sword in the sheath, but not at his belt, crossed the court without closing the door, and having cast an oblique glance at D'Artagnan and his companion, directed his course towards the cabaret itself, looking about in all directions with his eyes capable of piercing walls of consciences. "Humph," said D'Artagnan, "my tenants are communicating. That, no doubt, now is some amateur in hanging matters." At the same moment the cries and disturbance in the upper chambers ceased. Silence, under such circumstances, surprises more than a twofold increase of noise. D'Artagnan wished to see what was the cause of this sudden silence. He then perceived that this man, dressed as a cavalier, had just entered the principal chamber, and was haranguing the tipplers, who all listened to him with the greatest attention. D'Artagnan would perhaps have heard his speech but for the dominant noise of the popular clamors, which made a formidable accompaniment to the harangue of the orator. But it was soon finished, and all the people the cabaret contained came out, one after the other, in little groups, so that there only remained 6 in the chamber. One of these 6, the man with the sword, took the cabaretier aside, engaging him in discourse more or less serious, whilst the others lit a great fire in the chimney-place, a circumstance rendered strange by the fine weather and the heat. "It is very singular," said D'Artagnan to Raoul, "but I think I know those faces yonder." "Don't you think you can smell the smoke here?" said Raoul. "I rather think I can smell a conspiracy," replied D'Artagnan. He had not finished speaking, when 4 of these men came down into the court, and without the appearance of any bad design, mounted guard at the door of communication, casting, at intervals, glances at D'Artagnan, which signified many things. "Mordioux," said D'Artagnan in a low voice, "there is something going on. Are you curious, Raoul?" "According to the subject, chevalier." "Well, I am as curious as an old woman. Come a little more in front, we shall get a better view of the place. I would lay a wager that view will be something curious. But you know, Monsieur le Chevalier, that I am not willing to become a passive and indifferent spectator of the death of the 2 poor devils. And I, then, do you think I am a savage? We will go in again when it is time to do so. Come along." And they made their way towards the front of the house, and placed themselves near the window which, still more strangely than the rest, remained unoccupied. The 2 last drinkers, instead of looking out at this window, kept up the fire. On seeing D'Artagnan and his friend enter, "Ah, a reinforcement," murmured they. D'Artagnan jogged Raoul's elbow. "Yes, my braves, a reinforcement," said he. "Cordu, there is a famous fire. Whom are you going to cook?" The two men uttered a shout of jovial laughter, and instead of answering threw on more wood. D'Artagnan could not take his eyes off them. "I suppose," said one of the fire-makers, "they sent you to tell us the time, did not they?" "Without doubt they have," said D'Artagnan, anxious to know what was going on. "Why should I be here else if it were not for that?" "Then place yourself at the window if you please and observe." D'Artagnan smiled in his mustache, made a sign to Raoul and placed himself at the window. Chapter 62. Vive Colbert. The spectacle which the Grève now presented was a frightful one. The heads, leveled by the perspective, extended afar, thick and agitated as the ears of corn in a vast plain. From time to time a fresh report or a distant rumor made the heads oscillate and thousands of eyes flash. Now and then there were great movements. All those ears of corn bent, and became waves more agitated than those of the ocean, which rolled from the extremities to the center and beat, like the tides, against the hedge of archers who surrounded the gibbets. Then the handles of the halberds were let fall upon the heads and shoulders of the rash invaders. At times also, it was the steel as well as the wood, and in that case a large empty circle was formed around the guard, a space conquered upon the extremities which underwent, in their turn the oppression of the sudden movement, which drove them against the parapets of the Seine. From the window, that commanded a view of the whole place, D'Artagnan saw, with interior satisfaction, that such of the musketeers and guards as found themselves involved in the crowd, were able, with blows of their fists and the hilts of their swords, to keep room. He even remarked that they had succeeded, by that esprit de corps which doubles the strength of the soldier, in getting together in one group to the amount of about 50 men, and that, with the exception of a dozen stragglers whom he still saw rolling here and there, the nucleus was complete, and within reach of his voice. But it was not the musketeers and guards that drew the attention of D'Artagnan. Around the gibbets, and particularly at the entrances to the Arcade of Saint-Jean, moved a noisy mass, a busy mass. Daring faces, resolute demeanors were to be seen here and there, mingled with silly faces and indifferent demeanors. Signals were exchanged, hands given and taken. D'Artagnan remarked among the groups, and those groups the most animated, the face of the cavalier whom he had seen enter by the door of communication from his garden, and who had gone upstairs to harangue the drinkers. That man was organizing troops and giving orders. "Mordioux," said D'Artagnan to himself, "I was not deceived. I know that man, it is Neville. What the devil is he doing here?" A distant murmur, which became more distinct by degrees, stopped this reflection, and drew his attention another way. This murmur was occasioned by the arrival of the culprits. A strong picket of archers preceded them, and appeared at the angle of the arcade. The entire crowd now joined as if in one cry. All the cries united formed one immense howl. D'Artagnan saw Raoul was becoming pale, and he slapped him roughly on the shoulder. The firekeepers turned round on hearing the great cry, and asked what was going on. "The condemned are arrived," said D'Artagnan. "That's well," replied they, again replenishing the fire. D'Artagnan looked at them with much uneasiness. It was evident that these men who were making such a fire for no apparent purpose had some strange intentions. The condemned appeared upon the place. They were walking, the executioner before them, whilst 50 archers formed a hedge on their right and their left. Both were dressed in black. They appeared pale but firm. They looked impatiently over the people's heads, standing on tiptoe at every step. D'Artagnan remarked this. "Mordioux," cried he, "they are in a great hurry to get a sight of the gibbet." Raoul drew back, without, however, having the power to leave the window. Terror even has its attractions. "To the death! To the death!" cried 50,000 voices. "Yes, to the death!" howled 100 frantic others, as if the great mass had given them the reply. "To the halter! To the halter!" cried the great whole. "Vive le roi!" "Well," said D'Artagnan, "this is droll. I should have thought it was M. Colbert who had caused them to be hung." There was, at this moment, a great rolling movement in the crowd, which stopped for a moment the march of the condemned. The people of a bold and resolute mien, whom D'Artagnan had observed, by dint of pressing, pushing, and lifting themselves up, had succeeded in almost touching the hedge of archers. The cortege resumed its march. All at once, to cries of "Vive Colbert!" those men, of whom D'Artagnan never lost sight, fell upon the escort, which in vain endeavored to stand against them. Behind these men was the crowd. Then commenced, amidst a frightful tumult, as frightful a confusion. This time there was something more than cries of expectation or cries of joy, there were cries of pain. Halberds struck men down, swords ran through them, muskets were discharged at them. The confusion became then so great that D'Artagnan could no longer distinguish anything. Then, from this chaos, suddenly surged something like a visible intention, like a will pronounced. The condemned had been torn from the hands of the guards, and were being dragged towards the house of l'Image de Notre Dame. Those who dragged them shouted, "Vive Colbert!" The people hesitated, not knowing which they ought to fall upon, the archers or the aggressors. What stopped the people was that those who cried "Vive Colbert!" began to cry at the same time, "No halter! No halter! To the fire! To the fire! Burn the thieves! Burn the extortioners!" This cry, shouted with an ensemble, obtained enthusiastic success. The populace had come to witness an execution, and here was an opportunity offered them of performing one themselves. It was this that must be most agreeable to the populace. Therefore they ranged themselves immediately on the party of the aggressors against the archers, crying with the minority which had become, thanks to them, the most compact majority, "Yes, yes, to the fire with the thieves! Vive Colbert!" "Mordioux!" exclaimed D'Artagnan, "this begins to look serious." One of the men who remained near the chimney approached the window, a firebrand in his hand. "Ah," said he, "it gets warm." Then, turning to his companion, "There is the signal," added he, and he immediately applied the burning brand to the wainscoting. Now, this cabaret of the Image de Notre Dame was not a very newly built house, and therefore, did not require much entreating to take fire. In a second the boards began to crackle, and the flames arose sparkling to the ceiling. A howling from without replied to the shouts of the incendiaries. D'Artagnan, who had not seen what passed from being engaged at the window, felt at the same time the smoke which choked him and the fire that scorched him. "Hola!" cried he, turning round, "is the fire here? Are you drunk or mad, my masters?" The two men looked at each other with an air of astonishment. "In what?" asked they of D'Artagnan. "Was it not a thing agreed upon?" "A thing agreed upon that you should burn my house," vociferated D'Artagnan, snatching the brand from the hand of the incendiary, and striking him with it across the face. The second wanted to assist his comrade, but Raoul, seizing him by the middle, threw him out of the window, whilst D'Artagnan pushed his man down the stairs. Raoul, first disengaged, tore the burning wainscoting down, and threw it flaming into the chamber. At a glance D'Artagnan saw there was nothing to be feared from the fire, and sprang to the window. The disorder was at its height. The air was filled with simultaneous cries of, "To the fire! To the death! To the halter! To the stake! Vive Colbert! Vive Leroy!" The group which had forced the culprits from the hands of the archers had drawn close to the house, which appeared to be the goal towards which they dragged them. Menneville was at the head of this group, shouting louder than all the others, "To the fire! To the fire! Vive Colbert!" D'Artagnan began to comprehend what was meant. They wanted to burn the condemned, and his house was to serve as a funeral pile. "Halt there!" cried he, sword in hand and one foot upon the window. "Menneville, what do you want to do?" "Monsieur D'Artagnan," cried the latter, give way, give way! To the fire! To the fire with the thieves! Vive Colbert!" These cries exasperated D'Artagnan. "Mordioux," said he. "What? Burn the poor devils who are only condemned to be hung? That is infamous." Before the door, however, the mass of anxious spectators, rolled back against the walls, had become more thick and closed up the way. Menneville and his men, who were dragging along the culprits, were within 10 paces of the door. Menneville made a last effort. "Passage! Passage!" cried he, pistol in hand. "Burn them! Burn them!" repeated the crowd. "The Image de Notre Dame is on fire. Burn the thieves! Burn the monopolists in the Image de Notre Dame!" There now remained no doubt. It was plainly D'Artagnan's house that was their object. D'Artagnan remembered the old cry, always so effective from his mouth. "A moi! Musketeers!" shouted he with the voice of a giant, with one of those voices which dominate over cannon, the sea, the tempest. "A moi! Musketeers!" And suspending himself by the arm from the balcony, he allowed himself to drop amidst the crowd, which began to draw back form a house that rained men. Raoul was on the ground as soon as he, both sword in hand. All the musketeers on the place heard that challenging cry, all turned round at that cry and recognized D'Artagnan. To the captain," cried they in their turn. And the crowd opened before them as though before the prow of a vessel. At that moment D'Artagnan and Menneville found themselves face to face. "Passage, passage!" cried Menneville, seeing that he was within an arm's length from the door. "No one passes here," said D'Artagnan. "Take that then," said Menneville, firing his pistol almost within an arm's length. But before the cock fell, D'Artagnan had struck up Menneville's arm with the hilt of his sword and passed the blade through his body. "I told you plainly to keep yourself quiet," said D'Artagnan to Menneville, who rolled at his feet. "Passage! Passage!" cried the companions of Menneville, at first terrified but soon recovering, when they found they had only to do with 2 men. But those 2 men were 100-armed giants. The swords flew about in their hands like the burning glaive of the archangel. They pierce with its point, strike with the flat, cut with the edge. Every stroke brings down a man. "For the king!" cried D'Artagnan to every man he struck at, that is to say, to every man that fell. This cry became the charging word for the Musketeers, who, guided by it, joined D'Artagnan. During this time the archers, recovering from the panic they had undergone, charged the aggressors in the rear, and regular as mill-strokes, overturn or knock down all that opposed them. The crowd, which sees swords gleaming and drops of blood flying in the air, the crowd falls back and crushes itself. At length cries for mercy and of despair resound, that is, the farewell of the vanquished. The 2 condemned are again in the hands of the archers. D'Artagnan approaches them, seeing them pale and sinking. "Console yourselves, poor men," said he, "you will not undergo the frightful torture with which these wretches threatened you. The king has condemned you to be hung. You shall only be hung. Go on, hang them, and it will be over. There is no longer anything going on at the Image de Notre Dame. The fire has been extinguished with 2 tons of wine in default of water. The conspirators have fled by the garden. The archers are dragging the culprits to the gibbets." From this moment the affair did not occupy much time. The executioner, heedless about operating according to the rules of the art, made such haste that he dispatched the condemned in a couple of minutes. In the meantime the people gathered around D'Artagnan. They felicitated, they cheered him. He wiped his brow, streaming with sweat, and his sword, streaming with blood. He shrugged his shoulders at seeing Menneville writhing at his feet in the last convulsions. And, while Raoul turned away his eyes in compassion, he pointed to the Musketeers the gibbets laden with their melancholy fruit. "Poor devils," said he, "I hope they died blessing me, for I saved them with great difficulty." These words caught the ear of Menneville at the moment when he himself was breathing his last sigh. A dark, ironical smile flitted across his lips. He wished to reply, but the effort hastened the snapping of the cord of life. He expired. "Oh, all this is very frightful," murmured Raoul. "Let us be gone, Monsieur le Chevalier." "You are not wounded?" asked D'Artagnan. "Not at all, thank you." "That's well. Thou art a brave fellow, Mordioux, the head of the father and the arm of Porthos. If he had been here, good Porthos, you would have seen something worth looking at." Then, as if by way of remembrance, "But where the devil can that brave Porthos be?" murmured D'Artagnan. "Come, Chevalier, pray come away," urged Raoul. "1 minute, my friend, let me take my 37.5 pistols and I am at your service." "The house is a good property," added D'Artagnan as he entered the Image de Notre Dame, "but decidedly, even if it were less profitable, I should prefer its being in another quarter." Chapter 63. How M. Dimerus's diamond passed into the hands of M. D'Artagnan. Whilst this violent, noisy and bloody scene was passing on the Greve, several men, barricaded behind the gate of communication with the garden, replaced their swords in their sheaths, assisted one among them to mount a ready saddled horse which was waiting in the garden, and like a flock of startled birds, fled in all directions, some climbing the walls, others rushing out at the gates with all the fury of a panic. He who mounted the horse and gave him the spur so sharply that the animal was near leaping the wall, this cavalier, we say, crossed the place Baudoyer, passed like lightning before the crowd in the streets, riding against, running over and knocking down all that came in his way, and 10 minutes after, arrived at the gates of the superintendent, more out of breath than his horse. The Abbé Fouquet, at the clatter of hoofs on the pavement, appeared at a window of the court, and before even the cavalier had set foot to the ground, "Well, Danicamp?" cried he, leaning half out of the window. "Well, it is all over," replied the cavalier. "All over?" cried the abbé. "Then they are saved?" "No, monsieur," replied the cavalier, "they are hung." "Hung," repeated the abbé, turning pale. A lateral door suddenly opened, and Fouquet appeared in the chamber, pale, distracted, with lips half opened, breathing a cry of grief and anger. He stopped upon the threshold to listen to what was addressed from the court to the window. "Miserable wretches," said the abbé, "you did not fight then? Like lions. Say like cowards. Monsieur, 100 men accustomed to war, sword in hand, are worth 10,000 archers in a surprise. Where is Menneville, that boaster, that braggart, who was to come back either dead or a conqueror? Well, monsieur, he kept his word. He is dead. Dead. Who killed him? A demon disguised as a man, a giant armed with 10 flaming swords, a madman who at one blow extinguished the fire, put down the riot, and caused 100 musketeers to rise up out of the pavement of the Grève. Fouquet raised his brow, streaming with sweat, murmuring, "Oh, Lyodot and Diomeris. Dead, dead, dead. And I dishonored." The abbé turned round and perceiving his brother, despairing and livid, "Come, come," said he, "it is a blow of fate, monsieur, we must not lament thus. Our attempt has failed because God—" "Be silent, abbé. Be silent," cried Fouquet, "your excuses are blasphemies. Order that man up here, and let him relate the details of this terrible event." "But, brother—" "Obey, monsieur." The abbé made a sign, and in half a minute the man's step was heard upon the stairs. At the same time Gourville appeared behind Fouquet, like the guardian angel of the superintendent, pressing one finger on his lips to enjoin observation even amidst the bursts of his grief. The minister resumed all the serenity that human strength left at the disposal of a heart half broken with sorrow. Danicamp appeared. "Make your report," said Gourville. "Monsieur," replied the messenger, "we received orders to carry off the prisoners and to cry Vive Colbert, whilst carrying them off." "To burn them alive, was it not, abbé?" interrupted Gourville. "Yes, yes, the order was given to Menneville. Menneville knew what was to be done, and Menneville is dead." This news appeared rather to reassure Gourville than to sadden him. "Yes, certainly to burn them alive," said the abbé eagerly. "Granted, monsieur, granted," said the man, looking into the eyes and the faces of the two interlocutors, to ascertain what there was profitable or disadvantageous to himself in telling the truth. "Now proceed," said Gourville. "The prisoners," cried Danicamp, "were brought to the Grève, and the people, in a fury, insisted upon their being burnt instead of being hung." "And the people were right," said the abbé. "Go on." "But," resumed the man, "at the moment the archers were broken, at the moment the fire was set to one of the houses of the place destined to serve as a funeral pile for the guilty, this fury, this demon, this giant of whom I told you, and who, we had been informed, was the proprietor of the house in question, aided by a young man who accompanied him, threw out of the window those who kept the fire, called to his assistance the musketeers who were in the crowd, leaped himself from the window of the first story into the place, and plied his sword so desperately that the victory was restored to the archers. The prisoners were retaken, and Menneville killed. When once recaptured, the condemned were executed in 3 minutes. Fouquet, in spite of his self-command, could not prevent a deep groan escaping him. "And this man, the proprietor of the house, what is his name?" said the abbé. "I cannot tell you, not having even been able to get sight of him. My post had been appointed in the garden, and I remained at my post. Only the affair was related to me as I repeat it. I was ordered, when once the affair was at an end, to come at best speed and announce to you the manner in which it finished. According to this order I set out, full gallop, and here I am." "Very well, monsieur, we have nothing else to ask of you," said the abbé, more and more dejected, in proportion as the moment approached for finding himself alone with his brother. "Have you been paid?" asked Gourville. "Partly, monsieur," replied Danicamp. "Here are 20 pistols. Begone, monsieur, and never forget to defend, as this time has been done, the true interests of the king." "Yes, monsieur," said the man, bowing and pocketing the money. After which he went out. Scarcely had the door closed after him when Fouquet, who had remained motionless, advanced with a rapid step and stood between the abbé and Gourville. Both of them at the same time opened their mouths to speak to him. "No excuses," said he, "no recriminations against anybody. If I had not been a false friend I should not have confided to anyone the care of delivering Lyodot and Diomeris. I alone am guilty, to me alone are reproaches and remorse due. Leave me, abbé." "And yet, monsieur, you will not prevent me," replied the latter, "from endeavoring to find out the miserable fellow who has intervened to the advantage of M. Colbert in this so well-arranged affair, for if it is good policy to love our friends dearly, I do not believe that is bad which consists in obstinately pursuing our enemies. A truce to policy, abbé, begone, I beg of you, and do not let me hear any more of you till I send for you. What we most need is circumspection and silence. You have a terrible example before you, gentlemen. No reprisals, I forbid them." "There are no orders," grumbled the abbé, "which will prevent me from avenging a family affront upon the guilty person." "And I," cried Fouquet in that imperative tone to which one feels there is nothing to reply, "if you entertain one thought, one single thought, which is not the absolute expression of my will, I will have you cast into the Bastille 2 hours after that thought has manifested itself." Regulate your conduct accordingly, Abbé. The Abbé colored and bowed. Fouquet made a sign to Gourville to follow him, and was already directing his steps towards his cabinet, when the usher announced with a loud voice, Monsieur le Chevalier d'Artagnan. Who is he? Said Fouquet negligently to Gourville. An ex-lieutenant of His Majesty's Musketeers, replied Gourville in the same tone. Fouquet did not even take the trouble to reflect, and resumed his walk. I beg your pardon, monseigneur, said Gourville, but I have remembered, this brave man has quitted the king's service, and probably comes to receive an installment of some pension or other. Devil take him, said Fouquet, why does he choose his opportunity so ill? Permit me then, monseigneur, to announce your refusal to him, for he is one of my acquaintance, and is a man whom, in our present circumstances, it would be better to have as a friend than an enemy. Answer him as you please, said Fouquet. Good Lord, said the Abbé, still full of malice like an egotistical man, tell him there is no money particularly for musketeers. But scarcely had the Abbé uttered this imprudent speech, when the partly open door was thrown back and D'Artagnan appeared. Monsieur Fouquet, said he, I was well aware there was no money for musketeers here. Therefore I did not come to obtain any, but to have it refused. That being done, receive my thanks. I give you good day and will go and seek it at M. Colbert's. And he went out making an easy bow. Gourville, said Fouquet, run after that man and bring him back. Gourville obeyed and overtook D'Artagnan on the stairs. D'Artagnan, hearing steps behind him, turned round and perceived Gourville. Mordioux, my dear monsieur, said he, there are sad lessons which you gentlemen of finance teach us. I come to M. Fouquet to receive a sum accorded by His Majesty, and I am received like a mendicant who comes to ask charity, or a thief who comes to steal a piece of plate. But you pronounced the name of M. Colbert, my dear M. D'Artagnan. You said you were going to M. Colbert's? I certainly am going there, were it only to ask satisfaction of the people who try to burn houses, crying, Vive Colbert. Gourville pricked up his ears. Oh, said he, you allude to what has just happened at the Greve? Yes, certainly. And in what did that which has taken place concern you? What? Do you ask me whether it concerns me or does not concern me, if M. Colbert pleases to make a funeral pile of my house? So, your house, was it your house they wanted to burn? Pardieu, was it? Is the cabaret of the Image de Notre Dame yours, then? It has been this week. Well then, are you the brave captain? Are you the valiant blade who dispersed those who wish to burn the condemned? My dear Monsieur Gourville, put yourself in my place. I was an agent of the public force and a landlord too. As a captain, it is my duty to have the orders of the king accomplished. As a proprietor, it is to my interest my house should not be burnt. I have at the same time attended to the laws of interest and duty in replacing Messrs. Liaudot and Diemeris in the hands of the archers. Then it was you who threw the man out of the window? It was I myself, replied D'Artagnan modestly. And you who killed Meneville? I had that misfortune, said D'Artagnan, bowing like a man who is being congratulated. It was you then, in short, who caused the two condemned persons to be hung? Instead of being burnt, yes, monsieur, and I am proud of it. I saved the poor devils from horrible tortures. Understand, my dear Monsieur de Gourville, that they wanted to burn them alive. It exceeds imagination. Go, my dear Monsieur d'Artagnan, go, said Gourville, anxious to spare Fouquet the sight of the man who had just caused him such profound grief. No, said Fouquet, who had heard all from the door of the antechamber, not so, on the contrary, Monsieur d'Artagnan, come in. D'Artagnan wiped from the hilt of his sword a last bloody trace, which had escaped his notice, and returned. He then found himself face to face with these three men, whose countenances wore very different expressions. With the Abbé it was anger, with Gourville stupor, with Fouquet it was dejection. I beg your pardon, Monsieur le Minister, said D'Artagnan, but my time is short. I have to go to the office of the Intendant, to have an explanation with Monsieur Colbert, and to receive my quarter's pension. But, monsieur, said Fouquet, there is money here. D'Artagnan looked at the superintendent with astonishment. You have been answered inconsiderately, monsieur, I know because I heard it, said the minister. A man of your merit ought to be known by everybody. D'Artagnan bowed. Have you an order? Added Fouquet. Yes, monsieur. Give it me, I will pay you myself, come with me. He made a sign to Gourville and the Abbé, who remained in the chamber where they were. He led D'Artagnan into his cabinet. As soon as the door was shut, how much is due to you, monsieur? Why, something like 5,000 livres, monseigneur. 4 arrears of pay? For a quarter's pay. A quarter consisting of 5,000 livres? said Fouquet, fixing upon the Musketeer a searching look. Does the king then give you 20,000 livres a year? Yes, monseigneur, 20,000 livres a year. Do you think it is too much? I, cried Fouquet, and he smiled bitterly. If I had any knowledge of mankind, if I were, instead of being a frivolous, inconsequent, and vain spirit, of a prudent and reflective spirit, if, in a word, I had, as certain persons have known how, regulated my life, you would not receive 20,000 livres a year, but 100,000, and you would belong not to the king but to me. D'Artagnan colored slightly. There is sometimes in the manner in which a eulogium is given, in the voice, in the affectionate tone, a poison so sweet, that the strongest mind is intoxicated by it. The superintendent terminated his speech by opening a drawer, and taking from it 4 rouleaux, which he placed before D'Artagnan. The Gascon opened one. Gold, said he. It will be less burdensome, monsieur. But then, monsieur, these make 20,000 livres. No doubt they do. But only 5 are due to me. I wish to spare you the trouble of coming 4 times to my office. You overwhelm me, monsieur. I do only what I ought to do, monsieur le chevalier, and I hope you will not bear me any malice on account of the rude reception my brother gave you. He is of a sour, capricious disposition. Monsieur, said D'Artagnan, believe me, nothing would grieve me more than an excuse from you. Therefore I will make no more, and will content myself with asking you a favor. Oh, monsieur. Fouquet drew from his finger a ring worth about 3,000 pistoles. Monsieur, said he, this stone was given me by a friend of my childhood, by a man to whom you have rendered a great service. A service, I, said the Musketeer, I have rendered a service to one of your friends? You cannot have forgotten it, monsieur, for it dates this very day. And that friend's name was M. Dimerus. One of the condemned? Yes, one of the victims. Well, Monsieur D'Artagnan, in return for the service you have rendered him, I beg you to accept this diamond. Do so for my sake. Monsieur, you accept it, I say. Today is with me a day of mourning. Hereafter you will perhaps learn why. Today I have lost one friend. Well, I will try to get another. But, Monsieur Fouquet, adieu. Monsieur D'Artagnan, adieu, cried Fouquet with much emotion, or rather au revoir. And the minister quitted the cabinet, leaving in the hands of the Musketeer the ring and the 20,000 livres. Oh, said D'Artagnan after a moment's dark reflection. How on earth am I to understand what this means? Mordioux, I can understand this much, only, he is a gallant man. I will go and explain matters to M. Colbert. And he went out. Chapter 64. Difference D'Artagnan finds between the intendant and the superintendent. M. Colbert resided in the Rue Neuve des Petits Champs, in a house which had belonged to Beautru. D'Artagnan's legs cleared the distance in a short quarter of an hour. When he arrived at the residence of the new favorite, the court was full of archers and police who came to congratulate him or to excuse themselves, according to whether he should choose to praise or blame. The sentiment of flattery is instinctive with people of abject condition. They have the sense of it as the wild animal has that of hearing and smell. These people, or their leader, understood that there was a pleasure to offer to M. Colbert, in rendering him an account of the fashion in which his name had been pronounced during the rash enterprise of the morning. D'Artagnan made his appearance just as the chief of the watch was giving his report. He stood close to the door behind the archers. That officer took Colbert on one side, in spite of his resistance and the contradiction of his bushy eyebrows. In case, said he, you really desired, monsieur, that the people should do justice on the 2 traitors, it would have been wise to warn us of it. For indeed, monsieur, in spite of our regret at displeasing you or thwarting your views, we had our orders to execute. Triple fool, replied Colbert, furiously shaking his hair, thick and black as a mane. What are you telling me? What? That I could have had an idea of a riot. Are you mad or drunk? But, monsieur, they cried, Vive Colbert, replied the trembling watch. A handful of conspirators. No, no, a mass of people. Ah, indeed, said Colbert, expanding. A mass of people cried, Vive Colbert. Are you certain of what you say, monsieur? We had nothing to do but open our ears, or rather to close them, so terrible were the cries. And this was from the people, the real people? Certainly, monsieur, only these real people beat us. Oh, very well, continued Colbert thoughtfully. Then you suppose it was the people alone who wished to burn the condemned? Oh, yes, monsieur. That is quite another thing. You strongly resisted then? We had 3 of our men crushed to death, monsieur. But you killed nobody yourselves? Monsieur, a few of the rioters were left upon the square, and one among them who was not a common man. Who was he? A certain Menneville, upon whom the police have a long time had an eye. Menneville, cried Colbert, what, he who killed Rue de la Huchette, a worthy man who wanted a fat fowl? Yes, monsieur, the same. And did this Menneville also cry, Vive Colbert? Louder than all the rest, like a madman. Colbert's brow grew dark and wrinkled. A kind of ambitious glory which had lighted his face was extinguished, like the light of glowworms we crush beneath the grass. Then you say, resumed the deceived intendant, that the initiative came from the people? Menneville was my enemy, I would have had him hung, and he knew it well. Menneville belonged to the Abbé Fouquet. The affair originated with Fouquet. Does not everybody know that the condemned were his friends from childhood? That is true, thought D'Artagnan, and thus are all my doubts cleared up. I repeat it, Monsieur Fouquet may be called what they please, but he is a very gentlemanly man. And, continued Colbert, are you quite sure Menneville is dead? D'Artagnan thought the time was come for him to make his appearance. Perfectly, monsieur, replied he, advancing suddenly. Oh, is that you, monsieur? Said Colbert. In person, replied the Musketeer with his deliberate tone. It appears that you had in Menneville a pretty enemy. It was not I, monsieur, who had an enemy, replied Colbert. It was the king. Double brute, thought D'Artagnan, to think to play the great man and the hypocrite with me. Well, continued he to Colbert, I am very happy to have rendered so good a service to the king. Will you take upon you to tell his majesty, monsieur l'intendant? What commission is this you give me, and what do you charge me to tell his majesty, monsieur? Be precise, if you please, said Colbert in a sharp voice tuned beforehand to hostility. I give you no commission, replied D'Artagnan, with that calmness which never abandons the banterer. I thought it would be easy for you to announce to his majesty that it was I who, being there by chance, did justice upon Menneville and restored order to things. Colbert opened his eyes and interrogated the chief of the watch with a look. Ah, it is very true, said the latter, that this gentleman saved us. Why did you not tell me, monsieur, that you came to relate me this? Said Colbert with envy. Everything is explained, and more favorably for you than for anybody else. You are in error, monsieur l'intendant. I did not at all come for the purpose of relating that to you. It is an exploit, nevertheless. Oh, said the Musketeer carelessly, constant habit blunts the mind. To what do I owe the honor of your visit, then? Simply to this, the king ordered me to come to you. Ah, said Colbert, recovering himself when he saw D'Artagnan draw a paper from his pocket. It is to demand some money of me? Precisely, monsieur. Have the goodness to wait, if you please, monsieur, till I have dispatched the report of the watch. D'Artagnan turned upon his heel, insolently enough, and finding himself face to face with Colbert after his first turn, he bowed to him as a harlequin would have done. Then, after a second evolution, he directed his steps towards the door in quick time. Colbert was struck with this pointed rudeness, to which he was not accustomed. In general, men of the sword, when they came to his office, had such a want of money, that though their feet seemed to take root in the marble, they hardly lost their patience. Was D'Artagnan going straight to the king? Would he go and describe his rough reception or recount his exploit? This was a matter for grave consideration. At all events, the moment was badly chosen to send D'Artagnan away, whether he came from the king or on his own account. The Musketeer had rendered too great a service, and that too recently for it to be already forgotten. Therefore Colbert thought it would be better to shake off his arrogance and call D'Artagnan back. Oh, Monsieur d'Artagnan, cried Colbert, what? Are you leaving me thus? D'Artagnan turned round. Why not? Said he quietly. We have no more to say to each other, have we? You have, at least, money to receive as you have an order? Who, I? Not at all, my dear Monsieur Colbert. But, monsieur, you have an order. And in the same manner as you give a sword thrust, when you are required, I, on my part, pay when an order is presented to me. Present yours. It is useless, my dear Monsieur Colbert, said D'Artagnan, who inwardly enjoyed this confusion in the ideas of Colbert. My order is paid. Paid by whom? By Monsieur le Surintendant. Colbert grew pale. Explain yourself, said he in a stifled voice. If you are paid, why do you show me that paper? In consequence of the word of order of which you spoke to me so ingeniously just now, dear M. Colbert, the king told me to take a quarter of the pension he is pleased to make me. Of me? Said Colbert. Not exactly. The king said to me, go to M. Fouquet, the superintendent will perhaps have no money, then you will go and draw it of M. Colbert. The countenance of M. Colbert brightened for a moment, but it was with his unfortunate physiognomy as with a stormy sky, sometimes radiant, sometimes dark as night, according as the lightning gleams or the cloud passes. And was there any money in the superintendent's coffers? Asked he. Why, yes, he could not be badly off for money, replied D'Artagnan. It may be believed, since M. Fouquet, instead of paying me a quarter or 5,000 livres. A quarter or 5,000 livres, cried Colbert, struck as Fouquet had been, with the generosity of the sum for a soldier's pension. Why, that would be a pension of 20,000 livres? Exactly, M. Colbert. Best. You reckon like old Pythagoras. Yes, 20,000 livres. 10 times the appointment of an intendant of the finances. I beg to offer you my compliments, said Colbert with a vicious smile. Oh, said D'Artagnan, the king apologized for giving me so little, but he promised to make it more hereafter when he should be rich, but I must be gone having much to do. So, then, notwithstanding the expectation of the king, the superintendent paid you, did he? In the same manner as, in opposition to the king's expectation, you refused to pay me. I did not refuse, monsieur, I only begged you to wait. And you say that M. Fouquet paid you your 5,000 livres? Yes, as you might have done, but he did even better than that, M. Colbert. And what did he do? He politely counted me down the sum total, saying that for the king, his coffers were always full. The sum total. Fouquet has given you 20,000 livres instead of 5,000? Yes, monsieur. And what for? In order to spare me 3 visits to the money chest of the superintendent, so that I have the 20,000 livres in my pocket in good new coin. You see, then, that I am able to go away without standing in need of you, having come here only for form's sake. And D'Artagnan slapped his hand upon his pocket, with a laugh which disclosed to Colbert 32 magnificent teeth, as white as teeth of 25 years old, and which seemed to say in their language, "Serve up to us 32 little Colberts and we will chew them willingly." The serpent is as brave as the lion, the hawk as courageous as the eagle, that cannot be contested. It can only be said of animals that are decidedly cowardly, and are so called, that they will be brave only when they have to defend themselves. Colbert was not frightened at the 32 teeth of D'Artagnan. He recovered and suddenly, "Monsieur," said he, "Monsieur le Surintendant has done what he had no right to do." "What do you mean by that?" replied D'Artagnan. "I mean that your note. Will you let me see your note, if you please?" "Very willingly, here it is." Colbert seized the paper with an eagerness which the Musketeer did not remark without uneasiness, and particularly without a certain degree of regret at having trusted him with it. "Well, monsieur, the royal order says thus. At sight, I command that there be paid to M. D'Artagnan the sum of 5,000 livres, forming a quarter of the pension I have made him." "So, in fact, it is written," said D'Artagnan, affecting calmness. "Very well. The king only owed you 5,000 livres. Why has more been given to you?" "Because there was more, and M. Fouquet was willing to give me more. That does not concern anybody." "It is natural," said Colbert with a proud ease, "that you should be ignorant of the usages of state finance. But, monsieur, when you have 1,000 livres to pay, what do you do?" "I never have 1,000 livres to pay," replied D'Artagnan. "Once more," said Colbert, irritated, "once more, if you had any sum to pay, would you not pay what you ought?" "That only proves one thing," said D'Artagnan, "and that is, that you have your own particular customs in finance and M. Fouquet has his own. Mine, monsieur, are the correct ones. I do not say that they are not. And you have accepted what was not due to you." D'Artagnan's eyes flashed. "What is not due to me yet, you meant to say, M. Colbert, for if I have received what was not due to me at all, I should have committed a theft." Colbert made no reply to this subtlety. "You then owe 15,000 livres to the public chest," said he, carried away by his jealous ardor. "Then you must give me credit for them," replied D'Artagnan, with his imperceptible irony. "Not at all, monsieur." "Well, what will you do then? You will not take my rouleaus from me, will you? You must return them to my chest." "Monsieur Colbert, don't reckon upon that. The king wants his money, monsieur. And I, monsieur, I want the king's money. That may be so, but you must return this." "Not so. I have always understood that in matters of comptabilite, as you call it, a good cashier never gives back or takes back. Then, monsieur, we shall see what the king will say about it. I will show him this note, which proves that M. Fouquet not only pays what he does not owe, but that he does not even take care of vouchers for the sums that he has paid." "Now I understand why you have taken that paper, M. Colbert." Colbert did not perceive all that there was of a threatening character in his name pronounced in a certain manner. You shall see hereafter what use I will make of it, said he, holding up the paper in his fingers. Oh, said D'Artagnan, snatching the paper from him with a rapid movement, I understand perfectly well, Colbert, I have no occasion to wait for that. And he crumpled up the paper he had so cleverly seized. Monsieur, cried Colbert, this is violence. Nonsense. You must not be particular about a soldier's manners, replied D'Artagnan. I kiss your hands, my dear M. Colbert. And he went out, laughing in the face of the future minister. That man now, muttered he, was about to grow quite friendly. It is a great pity I was obliged to cut his company so soon. Chapter 65. Philosophy of the Heart and Mind. For a man who had seen so many much more dangerous ones, the position of D'Artagnan with respect to M. Colbert was only comic. D'Artagnan, therefore, did not deny himself the satisfaction of laughing at the expense of Monsieur l'Intendant, from the Rue de Petit Champs to the Rue de Lombards. It was a great while since D'Artagnan had laughed so long together. He was still laughing when Planchet appeared, laughing likewise at the door of his house, for Planchet, since the return of his patron, since the entrance of the English guineas, passed the greater part of his life in doing what D'Artagnan had only done from the Rue Neuve de Petit Champs to the Rue de Lombards. You are home then, my dear master? Said Planchet. No, my friend, replied the Musketeer, I am off, and that quickly. I will sup with you, go to bed, sleep 5 hours, and at break of day leap into my saddle. Has my horse had an extra feed? My dear master, replied Planchet, you know very well that your horse is the jewel of the family, that my lads are caressing it all day and cramming it with sugar, nuts, and biscuits. You ask me if he has had an extra feed of oats. You should ask if he has not had enough to burst him. Very well, Planchet, that is all right. Now then, I pass to what concerns me, my supper? Ready. A smoking roast joint, white wine, crayfish, and fresh-gathered cherries. All ready, my master. You are a capital fellow, Planchet. Come on then, let us sup, and I will go to bed. During supper D'Artagnan observed that Planchet kept rubbing his forehead, as if to facilitate the issue of some idea closely pent within his brain. He looked with an air of kindness at this worthy companion of former adventures and misadventures, and clinking glass against glass, Come, Planchet, said he, let us see what it is that gives you so much trouble to bring forth. Mordioux, speak freely and quickly. Well, this is it, replied Planchet. You appear to me to be going on some expedition or another. I don't say that I am not. Then you have some new idea? That is possible too, Planchet. Then there will be fresh capital to be ventured? I will lay down 50,000 livres upon the idea you are about to carry out. And so saying, Planchet rubbed his hands one against the other with a rapidity evincing great delight. Planchet, said D'Artagnan, there is but one misfortune in it. And what is that? That the idea is not mine. I can risk nothing upon it. These words drew a deep sigh from the heart of Planchet. That avarice is an ardent counselor. She carries away her man as Satan did Jesus to the mountain, and when once she has shown to an unfortunate all the kingdoms of the earth, she is able to repose herself, knowing full well that she has left her companion envy to gnaw at his heart. Planchet had tasted of riches easily acquired, and was never afterwards likely to stop in his desires. But, as he had a good heart in spite of his covetousness, as he adored D'Artagnan, he could not refrain from making him 1,000 recommendations, each more affectionate than the others. He would not have been sorry, nevertheless, to have caught a little hint of the secret his master concealed so well. Tricks, turns, counsels, and traps were all useless. D'Artagnan let nothing confidential escape him. The evening passed thus. After supper the portmanteau occupied D'Artagnan. He took a turn to the stable, patted his horse, and examined his shoes and legs. Then, having counted over his money, he went to bed, sleeping as if only 20, because he had neither inquietude nor remorse. He closed his eyes 5 minutes after he had blown out his lamp. Many events might, however, have kept him awake. Thought boiled in his brain, conjectures abounded, and D'Artagnan was a great drawer of horoscopes. But, with that imperturbable phlegm which does more than genius for the fortune and happiness of men of action, he put off reflection till the next day for fear, he said, not to be fresh when he wanted to be so. The day came. The Rue de Lombards had its share of the caresses of Aurora with the rosy fingers, and D'Artagnan arose like Aurora. He did not awaken anybody. He placed his portmanteau under his arm, descended the stairs without making one of them creak, and without disturbing one of the sonorous snorings in every story from the garret to the cellar. Then, having saddled his horse, shut the stable and house doors, he set off at a foot-pace on his expedition to Bretagne. He had done quite right not to trouble himself with all the political and diplomatic affairs which solicited his attention, for in the morning, in freshness and mild twilight, his ideas developed themselves in purity and abundance. In the first place, he passed before the house of Fouquet, and threw in a large gaping box the fortunate order which, the evening before, he had had so much trouble to recover from the hooked fingers of the intendant. Placed in an envelope and addressed to Fouquet, it had not even been divined by Planchet, who in divination was equal to Calchas or the Pythian Apollo. D'Artagnan thus sent back the order to Fouquet without compromising himself, and without having thenceforward any reproaches to make himself. When he had effected this proper restitution, "Now," he said to himself, "let us inhale much maternal air, much freedom from cares, much health, let us allow the horse Zephyr, whose flanks puff as if he had to respire an atmosphere, to breathe, and let us be very ingenious in our little calculations. It is time," said D'Artagnan, "to form a plan of the campaign, and, according to the method of M. Turin, who has a large head full of all sorts of good counsels, before the plan of the campaign it is advisable to draw a striking portrait of the generals to whom we are opposed. In the first place, M. Fouquet presents himself." "What is M. Fouquet?" "Fouquet," replied D'Artagnan to himself, "is a handsome man very much beloved by the women, a generous man very much beloved by the poets, a man of wit, much execrated by pretenders. Well, now I am neither woman, poet, nor pretender. I neither love nor hate Monsieur le Surintendant. I find myself therefore in the same position in which M. Turin found himself when opposed to the Prince de Condé at Jargeau Jean and the Faubourg Saint-Antoine. He did not execrate Monsieur le Prince, it is true, but he obeyed the king. Monsieur le Prince is an agreeable man, but the king is king." Turin heaved a deep sigh, called Condé my cousin, and swept away his army. "Now what does the king wish? That does not concern me. Now what does M. Colbert wish? Oh, that's another thing. Colbert wishes all that M. Fouquet does not wish. Then what does M. Fouquet wish? Oh, that is serious. M. Fouquet wishes precisely for all the king wishes." This monologue ended, D'Artagnan began to laugh, whilst making his whip whistle in the air. He was already on the high road, frightening the birds in the hedges, listening to the livres chinking and dancing in his leather pocket at every step, and let us confess it, every time that D'Artagnan found himself in such conditions, tenderness was not his dominant vice. "Come," said he, "I cannot think the expedition a very dangerous one, and it will fall out with my voyage as with that piece M. Monk took me to see in London, which was called, I think, Much Ado About Nothing." Chapter 66. The Journey. It was perhaps the 50th time since the day on which we open this history, that this man, with a heart of bronze and muscles of steel, had left house and friends, everything in short, to go in search of fortune and death. The one, that is to say death, had constantly retreated before him as if afraid of him. The other, that is to say fortune, for only a month past had really made an alliance with him. Although he was not a great philosopher, after the fashion of either Epicurus or Socrates, he was a powerful spirit, having knowledge of life and endowed with thought. No one is as brave, as adventurous, or as skillful as D'Artagnan, without at the same time being inclined to be a dreamer. He had picked up, here and there, some scraps of M. de la Rochefoucauld, worthy of being translated into Latin by M. de Port Royal, and he had made a collection en passant, in the society of Athos and Aramis, of many morsels of Seneca and Cicero, translated by them, and applied to the uses of common life. That contempt of riches which our Gascon had observed as an article of faith during the 35 first years of his life, had for a long time been considered by him as the first article of the code of bravery. "Article first," said he, "a man is brave because he has nothing. A man has nothing because he despises riches." Therefore, with these principles, which, as we have said, had regulated the 35 first years of his life, D'Artagnan was no sooner possessed of riches, than he felt it necessary to ask himself if, in spite of his riches, he were still brave. To this, for any other but D'Artagnan, the events of the Place de Grève might have served as a reply. Many consciences would have been satisfied with them, but D'Artagnan was brave enough to ask himself sincerely and conscientiously if he were brave. Therefore to this. "But it appears to me that I drew promptly enough, and cut and thrust pretty freely on the Place de Grève, to be satisfied of my bravery," D'Artagnan had himself replied. "Gently, Captain, that is not an answer. I was brave that day because they were burning my house, and there are 100 and even 1,000 to speak against one, that if those gentlemen of the riots had not formed that unlucky idea, their plan of attack would have succeeded, or, at least, it would not have been I who would have opposed myself to it. Now what will be brought against me? I have no house to be burnt in Bretagne. I have no treasure there that can be taken from me. No, but I have my skin, that precious skin of M. d'Artagnan, which to him is worth more than all the houses and all the treasures of the world. That skin to which I cling above everything because it is, everything considered, the binding of a body which encloses a heart very warm and ready to fight, and, consequently, to live. Then, I do desire to live, and, in reality I live much better, more completely since I have become rich. Who the devil ever said that money spoiled life? Upon my soul, it is no such thing, on the contrary, it seems as if I absorbed a double quantity of air and sun. Mordioux! What will it be then if I double that fortune, and if, instead of the switch I now hold in my hand, I should ever carry the baton of a marechal? Then I really don't know if there will be, from that moment, enough of air and sun for me. In fact, this is not a dream. Who the devil would oppose it if the king made me a marechal as his father, King Louis XIII, made a duke and constable of Albert de Luynes? Am I not as brave and much more intelligent than that imbecile de Vitry? That's exactly what will prevent my advancement. I have too much wit. Luckily, if there is any justice in this world, fortune owes me many compensations. She owes me certainly a recompense for all I did for Anne of Austria, and an indemnification for all she has not done for me. Then, at the present, I am very well with a king, and with a king who has the appearance of determining to reign. May God keep him in that illustrious road. For, if he is resolved to reign, he will want me, and if he wants me, he will give me what he has promised me, warmth and light, so that I march, comparatively, now as I marched formerly, from nothing to everything. Only the nothing of today is the all of former days. There has only this little change taken place in my life. And now let us see. Let us take the part of the heart as I just now was speaking of it. But in truth I only spoke of it from memory. And the Gascon applied his hand to his breast, as if he were actually seeking the place where his heart was. Ah, wretch, murmured he, smiling with bitterness. Ah, poor mortal species. You hoped, for an instant, that you had not a heart, and now you find you have one, bad courtier as thou art, and even one of the most seditious. You have a heart which speaks to you in favor of M. Fouquet. And what is M. Fouquet when the king is in question? A conspirator, a real conspirator, who did not even give himself the trouble to conceal his being a conspirator. Therefore, what a weapon would you not have against him if his good grace and his intelligence had not made a scabbard for that weapon? An armed revolt. For, in fact, M. Fouquet has been guilty of an armed revolt. Thus, while the king vaguely suspects M. Fouquet of rebellion, I know it. I could prove that M. Fouquet had caused the shedding of the blood of his Majesty's subjects. Now then, let us see. Knowing all that, and holding my tongue, what further would this heart wish in return for a kind action of M. Fouquet's, for an advance of 15,000 livres, for a diamond worth 1,000 pistoles, for a smile in which there was as much bitterness as kindness? I save his life. Now then I hope, continued the Musketeer, that this imbecile of a heart is going to preserve silence, and so be fairly quits with M. Fouquet. Now then the king becomes my son, and as my heart is quits with M. Fouquet, let him beware who places himself between me and my son. Forward, for his Majesty Louis XIV. Forward. These reflections were the only impediments which were able to retard the progress of D'Artagnan. These reflections once made, he increased the speed of his horse. But, however perfect his horse Zephyr might be, it could not hold out at such a pace forever. The day after his departure from Paris, his mount was left at Chartres, at the house of an old friend D'Artagnan had met with in an hotelier of that city. From that moment the Musketeer traveled on post-horses. Thanks to this mode of locomotion, he traversed the space separating Chartres from Chateaubriand. In the last of these two cities, far enough from the coast to prevent anyone guessing that D'Artagnan wished to reach the sea, far enough from Paris to prevent all suspicion of his being a messenger from Louis XIV, whom D'Artagnan had called his son, without suspecting that he who was only at present a rather poor star in the heaven of royalty, would, one day, make that star his emblem. The messenger of Louis XIV, we say, quitted his post and purchased a bidet of the meanest appearance. One of those animals which an officer of the cavalry would never choose, for fear of being disgraced. Excepting the color, this new acquisition recalled to the mind of D'Artagnan the famous orange-colored horse, with which, or rather upon which, he had made his first appearance in the world. Truth to say, from the moment he crossed this new steed, it was no longer D'Artagnan who was traveling. It was a good man clothed in an iron-grey Justicorps, brown haute de chausses, holding the medium between a priest and a layman. That which brought him nearest to the churchman was, that D'Artagnan had placed on his head a calotte of threadbare velvet, and over the calotte, a large black hat, no more sword, a stick hung by a cord to his wrist, but to which he promised himself as an unexpected auxiliary to join upon occasion, a good dagger 10 inches long concealed under his cloak. The bidet purchased at Chateaubriand completed the metamorphosis. It was called, or rather D'Artagnan called it, Furette, ferret. If I have changed Zephyr into Furette, said D'Artagnan, I must make some diminutive or other of my own name. So, instead of D'Artagnan, I will be Agnan short. That is a concession which I naturally owe to my grey coat, my round hat, and my rusty calotte. Monsieur d'Artagnan travelled, then, pretty easily upon Furette, who ambled like a true butter-woman's pad, and who, with his amble, managed cheerfully about 12 leagues a day, upon 4 spindle shanks, of which the practised eye of D'Artagnan had appreciated the strength and safety beneath the thick mass of hair which covered them. Jogging along, the traveller took notes, studied the country, which he traversed reserved and silent, ever seeking the most plausible pretext for reaching Bel-en-Mer, and for seeing everything without arousing suspicion. In this manner, he was enabled to convince himself of the importance the event assumed in proportion as he drew near to it. In this remote country, in this ancient duchy of Bretagne, which was not France at that period, and is not so even now, the people knew nothing of the King of France. They not only did not know him but were unwilling to know him. One face, a single one, floated visibly for them upon the political current. Their ancient dukes no longer ruled them. Government was a void, nothing more. In place of the sovereign duke, the seigneurs of parishes reigned without control, and above these seigneurs, God, who has never been forgotten in Bretagne. Among these suzerains of chateaux and belfries, the most powerful, the richest, the most popular was M. Fouquet, seigneur of Belle-Isle. Even in the country, even within sight of that mysterious isle, legends and traditions consecrate its wonders. Everyone might not penetrate it. The isle, of an extent of 6 leagues in length and 6 in breadth, was a seigneurial property, which the people had for a long time respected, covered as it was with the name of Retz, so redoubtable in the country. Shortly after the erection of this seigneury into a marquisate, Belle-Isle passed to M. Fouquet. The celebrity of the isle did not date from yesterday. Its name, or rather its qualification, is traced back to the remotest antiquity. The ancients called it Calonese, from 2 Greek words, signifying beautiful isle. Thus, at a distance of 1800 years, it had borne, in another idiom, the same name it still bears. There was then something in itself in this property of M. Fouquet's, besides its position of 6 leagues off the coast of France, a position which makes it a sovereign in its maritime solitude, like a majestic ship which disdains roads and proudly casts anchor in mid-ocean. D'Artagnan learnt all this without appearing the least in the world astonished. He also learnt the best way to get intelligence was to go to La Roche-Bernard, a tolerably important city at the mouth of the Vilaine. Perhaps there he could embark. If not, crossing the salt marshes, he would repair to Guérande or Le Croisic, to wait for an opportunity to cross over to Belle-Isle. He had discovered, besides, since his departure from Chateaubriand, that nothing would be impossible for Furette under the impulsion of M. Agnan, and nothing to M. Agnan through the initiative of Furette. He prepared then to sup off a teal and a torteau, in a hotel of La Roche-Bernard, and ordered to be brought from the cellar, to wash down these 2 Breton dishes, some cider, which, the moment it touched his lips, he perceived to be more Breton still. Chapter 67. How D'Artagnan became acquainted with a poet. Before taking his place at table, D'Artagnan acquired, as was his custom, all the information he could, but it is an axiom of curiosity, that every man who wishes to question well and fruitfully ought in the first place to lay himself open to questions. D'Artagnan sought, then, with his usual skill, a promising questioner in the hostelry of La Roche-Bernard. At the moment there were in the house, on the first story, 2 travelers either preparing for supper or at supper itself. D'Artagnan had seen their nags in the stable, and their equipages in the salle. One travelled with a lackey, undoubtedly a person of consideration. 2 Perchimaris, sleek, sound beasts, were suitable means of locomotion. The other, a little fellow, a traveller of meagre appearance, wearing a dusty surtout, dirty linen, and boots more worn by the pavement than the stirrup, had come from Nantes with a cart drawn by a horse so like Furette in colour, that D'Artagnan might have gone 100 miles without finding a better match. This cart contained divers large packets wrapped in pieces of old stuff. "That traveller yonder," said D'Artagnan to himself, "is the man for my money. He will do, he suits me, I ought to do for him and suit him. M. Agnan, with the grey doublet and the rusty calotte, is not unworthy of supping with the gentleman of the old boots and still older horse." This said, D'Artagnan called the host, and desired him to send his teal tourteau and cider up to the chamber of the gentleman of modest exterior. He himself climbed, a plate in his hand, the wooden staircase which led to the chamber and began to knock at the door. "Come in," said the unknown. D'Artagnan entered, with a simper on his lips, his plate under his arm, his hat in one hand, his candle in the other. "Excuse me, monsieur," said he, "I am as you are, a traveler. I know no one in the hotel, and I have the bad habit of losing my spirits when I eat alone, so that my repast appears a bad one to me and does not nourish me. Your face, which I saw just now when you came down to have some oysters opened, your face pleased me much. Besides, I have observed you have a horse just like mine, and that the host, no doubt on account of that resemblance, has placed them side by side in the stable, where they appear to agree amazingly well together. I therefore, monsieur, do not see any reason why the masters should be separated when the horses are united. Accordingly, I am come to request the pleasure of being admitted to your table. My name is Agnan, at your service, monsieur, the unworthy steward of a rich seigneur, who wishes to purchase some salt mines in this country, and sends me to examine his future acquisitions. In truth, monsieur, I should be well pleased if my countenance were as agreeable to you as yours is to me, for, upon my honor, I am quite at your service." The stranger, whom D'Artagnan saw for the first time, for before he had only caught a glimpse of him, the stranger had black and brilliant eyes, a yellow complexion, a brow a little wrinkled by the weight of 50 years, bonhomie in his features collectively, but some cunning in his look. One would say, thought D'Artagnan, that this merry fellow has never exercised more than the upper part of his head, his eyes and his brain. He must be a man of science. His mouth, nose, and chin signify absolutely nothing. "Monsieur," replied the latter, with whose mind and person we have been making so free, "you do me much honor, not that I am ever ennuyé, for I have," added he, smiling, "a company which amuses me always, but never mind that, I am happy to receive you." But when saying this, the man with the worn boots cast an uneasy look at his table, from which the oysters had disappeared, and upon which there was nothing left but a morsel of salt bacon. "Monsieur," D'Artagnan hastened to say, "the host is bringing me up a pretty piece of roasted poultry and a superb tourteau." D'Artagnan had read in the look of his companion, however rapidly it disappeared, the fear of an attack by a parasite. He divined justly. At this opening, the features of the man of modest exterior relaxed, and as if he had watched the moment for his entrance as D'Artagnan spoke, the host appeared, bearing the announced dishes. The tourteau and the teal were added to the morsel of broiled bacon. D'Artagnan and his guest bowed, sat down opposite to each other, and like two brothers shared the bacon and the other dishes. "Monsieur," said D'Artagnan, "you must confess that association is a wonderful thing." "How so?" replied the stranger with his mouth full. "Well, I will tell you," replied D'Artagnan. The stranger gave a short truce to the movement of his jaws, in order to hear the better. "In the first place," continued D'Artagnan, "instead of one candle which each of us had, we have two." "That is true," said the stranger, struck with the extreme lucidity of the observation. "Then I see that you eat my tourteau in preference, whilst I, in preference, eat your bacon." "That is true again." "And then, in addition to being better lighted and eating what we prefer, I place the pleasure of your company." "Truly, monsieur, you are very jovial," said the unknown cheerfully. "Yes, monsieur, jovial as all people are who carry nothing on their minds or, for that matter, in their heads." "I can see it is quite another sort of thing with you," continued D'Artagnan. "I can read in your eyes all sorts of genius." "Oh, monsieur." "Come, confess one thing." "What is that?" "That you are a learned man." "Ma foi, monsieur." "Hein. Almost." "Come then." "I am an author." "There," cried D'Artagnan, clapping his hands, "I knew I could not be deceived. It is a miracle." "Monsieur." "What, shall I have the honor of passing the evening in the society of an author, of a celebrated author, perhaps?" "Oh," said the unknown, blushing, "celebrated, monsieur, celebrated is not the word." "Modest?" cried D'Artagnan, transported. "He is modest." Then, turning towards the stranger with a character of blunt bonhomie, "But tell me at least the name of your works, monsieur, for you will please to observe you have not told me your name, and I have been forced to divine your genius." "My name is Jupinet, monsieur," said the author. "A fine name. A grand name." "Upon my honor, and I do not know why, pardon me the mistake if it be one, but surely I have heard that name somewhere." "I have made verses," said the poet modestly. "Ah, that is it then, I have heard them read." "A tragedy. I must have seen it played." The poet blushed again and said, I do not think that can be the case, for my verses have never been printed. Well then, it must have been the tragedy which informed me of your name. You are again mistaken, for the comedians of the Hôtel de Bourgogne would have nothing to do with it, said the poet with a smile, the receipt for which certain sorts of pride alone knew the secret. D'Artagnan bit his lips. Thus then you see, monsieur, continued the poet, you are in error on my account, and that not being at all known to you, you have never heard tell of me. Ah, that confounds me. That name, Jupinet, appears to me nevertheless a fine name and quite as worthy of being known as those of Corneille or Rotrou or Garnier. I hope, monsieur, you will have the goodness to repeat to me a part of your tragedy presently, by way of dessert, for instance. That will be sugared roast meat, Mordieux. Pardon me, monsieur, that was a little oath which escaped me because it is a habit with my lord and master. I sometimes allow myself to usurp that little oath as it seems in pretty good taste. I take this liberty only in his absence, please to observe, for you may understand that in his presence. But in truth, monsieur, this cider is abominable. Do you not think so? And besides, the pot is of such an irregular shape it will not stand on the table. Suppose we were to make it level? To be sure, but with what? With this knife. And the teal, with what shall we cut that up? Do you not by chance mean to touch the teal? Certainly. Well then, wait. And the poet rummaged in his pocket, and drew out a piece of brass, oblong, quadrangular, about a line in thickness and an inch and a half in length. But scarcely had this little piece of brass seen the light, than the poet appeared to have committed an imprudence, and made a movement to put it back again in his pocket. D'Artagnan perceived this, for he was a man that nothing escaped. He stretched forth his hand towards the piece of brass. Humph! That which you hold in your hand is pretty. Will you allow me to look at it? Certainly, said the poet, who appeared to have yielded too soon to a first impulse. Certainly you may look at it, but it will be in vain for you to look at it, added he with a satisfied air. If I were not to tell you its use, you would never guess it. D'Artagnan had seized as an avowal the hesitation of the poet, and his eagerness to conceal the piece of brass which a first movement had induced him to take out of his pocket. His attention, therefore, once awakened on this point, he surrounded himself with a circumspection which gave him a superiority on all occasions. Besides, whatever Jupinet might say about it, by a simple inspection of the object, he perfectly well knew what it was. It was a character in printing. Can you guess now what this is? Continued the poet. No, said D'Artagnan. No, ma foi. Well, monsieur, said Jupinet, this little piece of metal is a printing letter. Bah! A capital. Stop, 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 said D'Artagnan, opening his eyes very innocently. Yes, monsieur, a capital, the first letter of my name. And this is a letter, is it? Yes, monsieur. Well, I will confess one thing to you. And what is that? No, I will not, I was going to say something stupid. No, no, said Master Jupinet with a patronizing air. Well then, I cannot comprehend if that is a letter how you can make a word. A word? Yes, a printed word. Oh, that's very easy. Let me see. Does it interest you? Enormously. Well, I will explain the thing to you. Attend. I am attending. This is it. Good. Look attentively. I am looking. D'Artagnan, in fact, appeared absorbed in observations. Jupinet drew from his pocket 7 or 8 other pieces of brass smaller than the first. Ah, said D'Artagnan. What? You have, then, a whole printing office in your pocket. Best. That is curious indeed. Is it not? Good God, what a number of things we learn by traveling. To your health, said Jupinet, quite enchanted. To yours, Mordieux, to yours. But, an instant, not in this cider. It is an abominable drink, unworthy of a man who quenches his thirst at the Hippocrene fountain. Is not it so you call your fountain, you poets? Yes, monsieur, our fountain is so called. That comes from 2 Greek words, hippos, which means a horse, and— Monsieur, interrupted D'Artagnan, you shall drink of a liquor which comes from 1 single French word, and is none the worse for that, from the word grape. This cider gives me the heartburn. Allow me to inquire of your host if there is not a good bottle of Bugency, or of the Sarin growth, at the back of the large bins in his cellar. The host, being sent for, immediately attended. Monsieur, interrupted the poet, take care, we shall not have time to drink the wine, unless we make great haste, for I must take advantage of the tide to secure the boat. What boat? Asked D'Artagnan. Why, the boat which sets out for Belle Isle. Ah, for Belle Isle, said the Musketeer, that is good. Bah! You will have plenty of time, monsieur, replied the hotelier, uncorking the bottle. "The boat will not leave this hour." "But who will give me notice?" said the poet. "Your fellow traveler," replied the host. "But I scarcely know him. When you hear him departing, it will be time for you to go." "Is he going to Belle Isle likewise then?" "Yes." "The traveler who has a lackey?" asked D'Artagnan. "He is some gentleman, no doubt?" "I know nothing of him." "What? Know nothing of him?" "No, all I know is that he is drinking the same wine as you." "Peste! That is a great honor for us," said D'Artagnan, filling his companion's glass, whilst the host went out. "So," resumed the poet, returning to his dominant ideas, "you never saw any printing done?" "Never." "Well then, take the letters thus which compose the word you see, A-B, ma foi. Here is an R, 2 then A-G." And he assembled the letters with a swiftness and skill which did not escape the eye of D'Artagnan. "A brèche," said he as he ended. "Good," said D'Artagnan. "Here are plenty of letters got together, but how are they kept so?" And he poured out a second glass for the poet. Jupinet smiled like a man who has an answer for everything. Then he pulled out, still from his pocket, a little metal ruler composed of 2 parts like a carpenter's rule, against which he put together and in a line the characters, holding them under his left thumb. "And what do you call that little metal ruler?" said D'Artagnan, "for I suppose all these things have names." "This is called a composing stick," said Jupinet. "It is by the aid of this stick that the lines are formed." "Come then, I was not mistaken in what I said. You have a press in your pocket," said D'Artagnan, laughing with an air of simplicity so stupid that the poet was completely his dupe. "No," replied he, "but I am too lazy to write, and when I have a verse in my head, I print it immediately. That is a labor spared." "Mordioux," thought D'Artagnan to himself, "this must be cleared up." And under a pretext which did not embarrass the Musketeer, who was fertile in expedients, he left the table, went downstairs, ran to the shed under which stood the poet's little cart, and poked the point of his poniard into the stuff which enveloped one of the packages, which he found full of types, like those which the poet had in his pocket. "Humph," said D'Artagnan, "I do not yet know whether M. Fouquet wishes to fortify Belle Isle, but at all events here are some spiritual munitions for the castle." Then, enchanted with his rich discovery, he ran upstairs again and resumed his place at the table. D'Artagnan had learnt what he wished to know. He, however, remained none the less face to face with his partner, to the moment when they heard from the next room symptoms of a person's being about to go out. The printer was immediately on foot. He had given orders for his horse to be got ready. His carriage was waiting at the door. The second traveler got into his saddle in the courtyard with his lackey. D'Artagnan followed Jupinet to the door. He embarked his cart and horse on board the boat. As to the opulent traveler, he did the same with his 2 horses and servant. But all the wit D'Artagnan employed in endeavoring to find out his name was lost. He could learn nothing. Only he took such notice of his countenance, that it was impressed upon his mind forever. D'Artagnan had a great inclination to embark with the 2 travelers, but an interest more powerful than curiosity, that of success, repelled him from the shore and brought him back again to the hostelry. He entered with a sigh, and went to bed directly in order to be ready early in the morning with fresh ideas and the sage counsel of sufficing sleep. Chapter 68. D'Artagnan continues his investigations. At daybreak D'Artagnan saddled Furette, who had fared sumptuously all night, devouring the remainder of the oats and hay left by his companions. The Musketeer sifted all he possibly could out of the host, who he found cunning, mistrustful, and devoted, body and soul, to M. Fouquet. In order not to awaken the suspicions of this man, he carried on his fable of being a probable purchaser of some salt mines. To have embarked for Belle Isle at Rochebernard would have been to expose himself still further to comments which had, perhaps, been already made, and would be carried to the castle. Moreover, it was singular that this traveler and his lackey should have remained a mystery to D'Artagnan, in spite of all the questions addressed by him to the host, who appeared to know him perfectly well. The Musketeer then made some inquiries concerning the salt mines, and took the road to the marshes, leaving the sea on his right, and penetrating into that vast and desolate plain which resembles a sea of mud, of which, here and there, a few crests of salt silver the undulations. Furette walked admirably with his little nervous legs, along the foot-wide causeways which separate the salt mines. D'Artagnan, aware of the consequences of a fall, which would result in a cold bath, allowed him to go as he liked, contenting himself with looking at, on the horizon, 3 rocks, that rose up like lance blades from the bosom of the plain, destitute of verdure. Piriac, the bourgs of Batz and Le Croisic, exactly resembling each other, attracted and suspended his attention. If the traveler turned round, the better to make his observations, he saw on the other side an horizon of 3 other steeples, Garand, Le Polygon and Saint Joachim, which in their circumference represented a set of skittles, of which he and Furette were but the wandering ball. Piriac was the first little port on his right. He went thither with the names of the principal salters on his lips. At the moment he reached the little port of Piriac, 5 large barges, laden with stone, were leaving it. It appeared strange to D'Artagnan that stone should be leaving a country where none are found. He had recourse to all the amenity of M. Agnan to learn from the people of the port the cause of this singular arrangement. An old fisherman replied to M. Agnan that the stones very certainly did not come from Piriac or the marshes. "Where do they come from then?" asked the Musketeer. "Monsieur, they come from Nantes and Paimboeuf." "Where are they going then?" "Monsieur, to Belle Isle." Ah, said D'Artagnan in the same tone he had assumed to tell the printer that his character interested him. "Are they building at Belle Isle then?" "Why, yes, monsieur. Fouquet has the walls of the castle repaired every year." "It is in ruins then?" "It is old." "Thank you." "The fact is," said D'Artagnan to himself, "nothing is more natural. Every proprietor has a right to repair his own property. It would be like telling me I was fortifying the image de Notre Dame, when I was simply obliged to make repairs. In good truth, I believe false reports have been made to His Majesty, and he is very likely to be in the wrong. You must confess," continued he then, aloud and addressing the fisherman, for his part of a suspicious man was imposed upon him by the object even of his mission. "You must confess, my dear monsieur, that these stones travel in a very curious fashion." "How so?" said the fisherman. "They come from Nantes or Paimboeuf by the Loire, do they not?" "With the tide." "That is convenient. I don't say it is not. But why do they not go straight from Saint Nazaire to Belle Isle?" "Because the chalins, barges, are freshwater boats and take the sea badly," replied the fisherman. "That is not sufficient reason." "Pardon me, monsieur, one may see that you have never been a sailor," added the fisherman, not without a sort of disdain. "Explain to me, if you please, my good man. It appears to me that to come from Paimboeuf to Piriac and go from Piriac to Belle Isle is as if we went from Rochebernard to Nantes, and from Nantes to Piriac." "By water that would be the nearest way," replied the fisherman imperturbably. "But there is an elbow?" The fisherman shook his head. "The shortest road from one place to another is a straight line," continued D'Artagnan. "You forget the tide, monsieur." "Well, take the tide." "And the wind." "Well, and the wind." "Without doubt, the current of the Loire carries barks almost as far as Croisic. If they want to lie by a little or to refresh the crew, they come to Piriac along the coast. From Piriac they find another inverse current, which carries them to the Isle d'Umel, 2 leagues and a half. Granted. There the current of the Vilaine throws them upon another isle, the Isle of Hoetic. I agree with that. Well, monsieur, from that isle to Belle Isle the way is quite straight. The sea, broken both above and below, passes like a canal, like a mirror between the 2 isles. The chalins glide along upon it like ducks upon the Loire. That's how it is." "It does not signify," said the obstinate M. Agnan. "It is a long way round." "Yes, but M. Fouquet will have it so," replied as conclusive the fisherman, taking off his woolen cap at the enunciation of that respected name. A look from D'Artagnan, a look as keen and piercing as a sword blade, found nothing in the heart of the old man but a simple confidence. On his features, nothing but satisfaction and indifference. He said, "M. Fouquet will have it so," as he would have said, "God has willed it." D'Artagnan had already advanced too far in this direction. Besides, the chalins being gone, there remained nothing at Piriac but a single bark, that of the old man, and it did not look fit for sea without great preparation. D'Artagnan therefore patted Furette, who, as a new proof of his charming character, resumed his march with his feet in the salt mines, and his nose to the dry wind, which bends the furs and the broom of this country. They reached Le Croisic about 5 o'clock. If D'Artagnan had been a poet, it was a beautiful spectacle. The immense strand of a league or more the sea covers at high tide, and which at the reflux appears grey and desolate, strewed with polypi and seaweed, with pebbles sparse and white, like bones in some vast old cemetery. But the soldier, the politician, and the ambitious man had no longer the sweet consolation of looking towards heaven to read there a hope or a warning. A red sky signifies nothing to such people but wind and disturbance. White and fleecy clouds upon the azure only say that the sea will be smooth and peaceful. D'Artagnan found the sky blue, the breeze embalmed with saline perfumes, and he said, I will embark with the first tide if it be but in a nutshell. At Le Croisic as at Piriac, he had remarked enormous heaps of stone lying along the shore. These gigantic walls, diminished every tide by the barges for Belle-Isle, were, in the eyes of the Musketeer, the consequence and the proof of what he had well divined at Piriac. Was it a wall that M. Fouquet was constructing? Was it a fortification that he was erecting? To ascertain that, he must make fuller observations. D'Artagnan put Furette into a stable, supped, went to bed, and on the morrow took a walk upon the port, or rather upon the shingle. Le Croisic has a port of 50 feet. It has a lookout which resembles an enormous brioche, a kind of cake, elevated on a dish. The flat strand is the dish. Hundreds of barrows full of earth amalgamated with pebbles, and rounded into cones, with sinuous passages between, are lookouts and brioches at the same time. It is so now, and it was so 200 years ago, only the brioche was not so large, and probably there were to be seen two trellises of lath around the brioche, which constitute an ornament, planted like guards foes along the passages that wind towards the little terrace. Upon the shingle lounged 3 or 4 fishermen talking about sardines and shrimps. D'Artagnan, with his eyes animated by a rough gaiety, and a smile upon his lips, approached these fishermen. Any fishing going on today? Said he. Yes, monsieur, replied one of them, we are only waiting for the tide. Where do you fish, my friends? Upon the coasts, monsieur. Which are the best coasts? Ah, that is all according. The tour of the Isles, for example? Yes, but they are a long way off, those isles, are they not? Not very, 4 leagues. 4 leagues. That is a voyage. The fisherman laughed in M. Agnan's face. Hear me then, said the latter with an air of simple stupidity, 4 leagues off you lose sight of land, do you not? Why, not always. Ah, it is a long way, too long, or else I would have asked you to take me aboard and to show me what I have never seen. What is that? A live sea fish. Monsieur comes from the province? Said a fisherman. Yes, I come from Paris. The Breton shrugged his shoulders. Then, have you ever seen M. Fouquet in Paris? Asked he. Often, replied D'Artagnan. Often, repeated the fishermen, closing their circle round the Parisian. Do you know him? A little. He is the intimate friend of my master. Ah, said the fisherman in astonishment. And, said D'Artagnan, I have seen all his chateaux of Saint-Mandé, of Vaux, and his hotel in Paris. Is that a fine place? Superb. It is not so fine a place as Belle-Isle, said the fisherman. Bah! Cried M. D'Artagnan, breaking into a laugh so loud that he angered all his auditors. It is very plain that you have never seen Belle-Isle, said the most curious of the fishermen. Do you know that there are 6 leagues of it, and that there are such trees on it as cannot be equalled even at Nady-sur-Fosse? Trees in the sea, cried D'Artagnan. Well, I should like to see them. That can be easily done. We are fishing at the Isle de Hoetic. Come with us. From that place you will see, as a paradise, the black trees of Belle-Isle against the sky. You will see the white line of the castle, which cuts the horizon of the sea like a blade. Oh, said D'Artagnan, that must be very beautiful. But do you know there are 100 belfries at M. Fouquet's chateau of Vaux? The Breton raised his head in profound admiration, but he was not convinced. 100 belfries. Ah, that may be, but Belle-Isle is finer than that. Should you like to see Belle-Isle? Is that possible? Asked D'Artagnan. Yes, with permission of the governor. But I do not know the governor. As you know M. Fouquet, you can tell your name. Oh, my friends, I am not a gentleman. Everybody enters Belle-Isle, continued the fisherman in his strong, pure language, provided he means no harm to Belle-Isle or its master. A slight shudder crept over the body of the Musketeer. That is true, thought he. Then recovering himself, if I were sure, said he, not to be seasick. What, upon her? Said the fisherman, pointing with pride to his pretty round-bottomed bark. Well, you almost persuade me, cried M. Agnan. I will go and see Belle-Isle, but they will not admit me. We shall enter safe enough. Yo. What for? Why, dame. To sell fish to the corsairs. Ah, corsairs, what do you mean? Well, I mean that M. Fouquet is having 2 corsairs built to chase the Dutch and the English, and we sell our fish to the crews of those little vessels. Come, come, said D'Artagnan to himself, better and better. A printing press, bastions, and corsairs. Well, M. Fouquet is not an enemy to be despised, as I presume to fancy. He is worth the trouble of traveling to see him nearer. We set out at 5:30, said the fisherman gravely. I am quite ready, and I will not leave you now. So D'Artagnan saw the fishermen haul their barks to meet the tide with a windlass. The sea rose. Agnan allowed himself to be hoisted on board, not without sporting a little fear and awkwardness, to the amusement of the young beach urchins who watched him with their large intelligent eyes. He laid himself down upon a folded sail, not interfering with anything whilst the bark prepared for sea, and with its large square sail, it was fairly out within 2 hours. The fishermen, who prosecuted their occupation as they proceeded, did not perceive that their passenger had not become pale, neither groaned nor suffered, that in spite of that horrible tossing and rolling of the bark, to which no hand imparted direction, the novice passenger had preserved his presence of mind and his appetite. They fished, and their fishing was sufficiently fortunate. To lines baited with prawn, sols came with numerous gambles to bite. 2 nets had already been broken by the immense weight of congers and haddocks. 3 seals ploughed the hold with their slimy folds and their dying contortions. D'Artagnan brought them good luck, they told him so. The soldier found the occupation so pleasant, that he put his hand to the work, that is to say to the lines, and uttered roars of joy, and mordicks enough to have astonished his musketeers themselves, every time that a shock given to his line by the captured fish required the play of the muscles of his arm, and the employment of his best dexterity. The party of pleasure had made him forget his diplomatic mission. He was struggling with a very large conger, and holding fast with one hand to the side of the vessel, in order to seize with the other the gaping jowl of his antagonist, when the master said to him, "Take care they don't see you from Belle-Isle." These words produced the same effect upon D'Artagnan as the hissing of the first bullet on a day of battle. He let go of both line and conger, which, dragging each other, returned again to the water. D'Artagnan perceived, within half a league at most, the blue and marked profile of the rocks of Belle-Isle, dominated by the majestic whiteness of the castle. In the distance, the land with its forests and verdant plains, cattle on the grass. This was what first attracted the attention of the Musketeer. The sun darted its rays of gold upon the sea, raising a shining mist round this enchanted isle. Little could be seen of it, owing to this dazzling light, but the salient points. Every shadow was strongly marked, and cut with bands of darkness the luminous fields and walls. Said D'Artagnan, at the aspect of those masses of black rocks. These are fortifications which do not stand in need of any engineer to render a landing difficult. How the devil can a landing be effected on that isle which God has defended so completely? This way, replied the patron of the bark, changing the sail, and impressing upon the rudder a twist which turned the boat in the direction of a pretty little port, quite coquettish, round, and newly battlement. "What the devil do I see yonder?" said D'Artagnan. "You see Loch Maria," replied the fisherman. "Well, but there. That is Bangor. And further on? Sauson and then Le Palais. Mordioux, it is a world. There are some soldiers." "There are 1,700 men in Belle, monsieur," replied the fisherman proudly. "Do you know that the least garrison is of 20 companies of infantry?" "Mordioux!" cried D'Artagnan, stamping with his foot. His Majesty was right enough. They landed. Chapter 69. D'Artagnan was to meet an old acquaintance. There is always something in a landing, if it be only from the smallest sea-boat, a trouble and a confusion which do not leave the mind the liberty of which it stands in need in order to study at the first glance the new locality presented to it. The movable bridges, the agitated sailors, the noise of the water on the pebbles, the cries and importunities of those who wait upon the shores, are multiplied details of that sensation which is summed up in one single result: hesitation. It was not, then, till after standing several minutes on the shore that D'Artagnan saw upon the port, but more particularly in the interior of the isle, an immense number of workmen in motion. At his feet D'Artagnan recognized the 5 chalons laden with rough stone he had seen leave the port of Piriac. The smaller stones were transported to the shore by means of a chain formed by 25 or 30 peasants. The large stones were loaded on trolleys which conveyed them in the same direction as the others, that is to say towards the works, of which D'Artagnan could as yet appreciate neither the strength nor the extent. Everywhere was to be seen an activity equal to that which Telemachus observed on his landing at Salentum. D'Artagnan felt a strong inclination to penetrate into the interior, but he could not, under the penalty of exciting mistrust, exhibit too much curiosity. He advanced then little by little, scarcely going beyond the line formed by the fishermen on the beach, observing everything, saying nothing, and meeting all suspicion that might have been excited with a half-silly question or a polite bow. And yet, whilst his companions carried on their trade, giving or selling their fish to the workmen or the inhabitants of the city, D'Artagnan had gained by degrees, and reassured by the little attention paid to him, He began to cast an intelligent and confident look upon the men and things that appeared before his eyes. And his very first glance fell on certain movements of earth about which the eye of a soldier could not be mistaken. At the two extremities of the port, in order that their fires should converge upon the great axis of the ellipse formed by the basin, in the first place, 2 batteries had been raised, evidently destined to receive flank pieces, for D'Artagnan saw the workmen finishing the platform and making ready the demi-circumference in wood upon which the wheels of the pieces might turn to embrace every direction over the epaulement. By the side of each of these batteries other workmen were strengthening gabions filled with earth, the lining of another battery. The latter had embrasures, and the overseer of the works called successively men who, with cords, tied the saucissons and cut the lozenges and right angles of turfs destined to retain the matting of the embrasures. By the activity displayed in these works, already so far advanced, they might be considered as finished. They were not yet furnished with their cannons, but the platforms had their jeets and their madriers all prepared. The earth, beaten carefully, was consolidated, and supposing the artillery to be on the island, in less than 2 or 3 days the port might be completely armed. That which astonished D'Artagnan, when he turned his eyes from the coast batteries to the fortifications of the city, was to see that Belle-Isle was defended by an entirely new system, of which he had often heard the Comte de la Fère speak as a wonderful advance, but of which he had as yet never seen the application. These fortifications belonged neither to the Dutch method of Marolles, nor to the French method of the Chevalier Antoine de Ville, but to the system of Maigny's son Mallet, a skillful engineer, who about 6 or 8 years previously had quitted the service of Portugal to enter that of France. The works had this peculiarity, that instead of rising above the earth, as did the ancient ramparts destined to defend a city from escalades, they, on the contrary, sank into it, and what created the height of the walls was the depth of the ditches. It did not take long to make D'Artagnan perceive the superiority of such a system, which gives no advantage to cannon. Besides, as the fosses were lower than or on a level with the sea, these fosses could be instantly inundated by means of subterranean sluices. Otherwise, the works were almost complete, and a group of workmen, receiving orders from a man who appeared to be conductor of the works, were occupied in placing the last stones. A bridge of planks thrown over the fosses for the greater convenience of the maneuvers connected with the barrows, joined the interior to the exterior. With an air of simple curiosity D'Artagnan asked if he might be permitted to cross the bridge, and he was told that no order prevented it. Consequently he crossed the bridge and advanced towards the group. This group was superintended by the man whom D'Artagnan had already remarked, and who appeared to be the engineer-in-chief. A plan was lying open before him upon a large stone forming a table, and at some paces from him a crane was in action. This engineer, who by his evident importance first attracted the attention of D'Artagnan, wore a justacorps, which, from its sumptuousness, was scarcely in harmony with the work he was employed in, that rather necessitated the costume of a master mason than of a noble. He was a man of immense stature and great square shoulders, and wore a hat covered with feathers. He gesticulated in the most majestic manner, and appeared, for D'Artagnan only saw his back, to be scolding the workmen for their idleness and want of strength. D'Artagnan continued to draw nearer. At that moment the man with the feathers ceased to gesticulate, and, with his hands placed upon his knees, was following, half-bent, the effort of 6 workmen to raise a block of hewn stone to the top of a piece of timber destined to support that stone, so that the cord of the crane might be passed under it. The 6 men, all on one side of the stone, united their efforts to raise it to 8 or 10 inches from the ground, sweating and blowing, whilst the 7th got ready for when there should be daylight enough beneath it to slide in the roller that was to support it. But the stone had already twice escaped from their hands before gaining a sufficient height for the roller to be introduced. There can be no doubt that every time the stone escaped them, they bounded quickly backwards, to keep their feet from being crushed by the refalling stone. Every time the stone, abandoned by them, sunk deeper into the damp earth, which rendered the operation more and more difficult. A third effort was followed by no better success, but with progressive discouragement. And yet, when the 6 men were bent towards the stone, the man with the feathers had himself, with a powerful voice, given the word of command, "Firm," which regulates maneuvers of strength. Then he drew himself up. Oh, said he, what is this all about? Have I to do with men of straw? Corne de Boeuf. Stand on one side, and you shall see how this is to be done. Peste, said D'Artagnan, will he pretend to raise that rock? That would be a sight worth looking at. The workmen, as commanded by the engineer, drew back with their ears down and shaking their heads, with the exception of the one who held the plank, who prepared to perform the office. The man with the feathers went up to the stone, stooped, slipped his hands under the face lying upon the ground, stiffened his Herculean muscles, and without a strain, with a slow motion like that of a machine, lifted the end of the rock a foot from the ground. The workman who held the plank profited by the space thus given him, and slipped the roller under the stone. "That's the way," said the giant, not letting the rock fall again, but placing it upon its support. "Mordioux!" cried D'Artagnan, "I know but one man capable of such a feat of strength." "Hein!" cried the colossus, turning round. "Porthos!" murmured D'Artagnan, seized with stupor. "Porthos at Belle-Isle." On his part, the man with the feathers fixed his eyes upon the disguised lieutenant, and in spite of his metamorphosis recognized him. "D'Artagnan!" cried he, and the color mounted to his face. "Hush!" said he to D'Artagnan. "Hush!" in his turn said the Musketeer. In fact, if Porthos had just been discovered by D'Artagnan, D'Artagnan had just been discovered by Porthos. The interest of the particular secret of each struck them both at the same instant. Nevertheless, the first movement of the two men was to throw their arms around each other. What they wished to conceal from the bystanders was not their friendship, but their names. But after the embrace came reflection. "What the devil brings Porthos to Belle-Isle lifting stones?" said D'Artagnan. Only D'Artagnan uttered that question in a low voice. Less strong in diplomacy than his friend, Porthos thought aloud. "How the devil did you come to Belle-Isle?" asked he of D'Artagnan, "and what do you want to do here?" It was necessary to reply without hesitation. To hesitate in answer to Porthos would have been a check, for which the self-love of D'Artagnan would never have consoled itself. "Pardieu! My friend, I am at Belle-Isle because you are here." "Ah, bah!" said Porthos, visibly stupefied with the argument and seeking to account for it to himself, with the felicity of deduction we know to be particular to him. "Without doubt," continued D'Artagnan, unwilling to give his friend time to recollect himself, "I have been to see you at Pierrefonds." "Indeed?" "Yes." "And you did not find me there?" "No, but I found Mouston." "Is he well?" "Peste." "Well, but Mouston did not tell you I was here." "Why should he not? Have I, perchance, deserved to lose his confidence?" "No, but he did not know it." "Well, that is a reason at least that does not offend my self-love." "Then how did you manage to find me?" "My dear friend, a great noble like you always leaves trace behind him on his passage, and I should think but poorly of myself, if I were not sharp enough to follow the traces of my friends." This explanation, flattering as it was, did not entirely satisfy Porthos. "But I left no traces behind me, for I came here disguised," said Porthos. "Ah, you came disguised, did you?" said D'Artagnan. "Yes." "And how?" "As a miller." "And do you think a great noble like you, Porthos, can affect common manners so as to deceive people?" "Well, I swear to you, my friend, that I played my part so well that everybody was deceived." "Indeed?" "So well, that I have not discovered and joined you." "Yes, but how did you discover and join me?" "Stop a bit. I was going to tell you how. Do you imagine Mouston?" "Ah, it was that fellow Mouston," said Porthos, gathering up those two triumphant arches which served him for eyebrows. "But stop, I tell you, it was no fault of Mouston's because he was ignorant of where you were. I know he was, and that is why I am in such haste to understand." "Oh, how impatient you are, Porthos. When I do not comprehend, I am terrible." "Well, you will understand. Aramis wrote to you at Pierrefonds, did he not?" "Yes." "And he told you to come before the equinox." "That is true." "Well, that is it," said D'Artagnan, hoping that this reason would mystify Porthos. Porthos appeared to give himself up to a violent mental labor. "Yes, yes," said he, "I understand. As Aramis told me to come before the equinox, you have understood that that was to join him. You then inquired where Aramis was, saying to yourself, 'Where Aramis is, there Porthos will be.' You have learnt that Aramis was in Bretagne, and you said to yourself, 'Porthos is in Bretagne.'" "Exactly." "In good truth, Porthos, I cannot tell why you have not turned conjurer. So you understand that, arriving at Rochebernard, I heard of the splendid fortifications going on at Belle-Isle. The account raised my curiosity. I embarked in a fishing boat, without dreaming that you were here. I came, and I saw a monstrous fine fellow lifting a stone Ajax could not have stirred. I cried out, 'Nobody but the Baron de Bragelonne could have performed such a feat of strength.' You heard me, you turned round, you recognized me, we embraced, and ma foi, if you like, my dear friend, we will embrace again." "Ah, now all is explained," said Porthos, and he embraced D'Artagnan with so much friendship as to deprive the Musketeer of his breath for 5 minutes. "Why, you are stronger than ever," said D'Artagnan, "and still happily in your arms." Porthos saluted D'Artagnan with a gracious smile. During the 5 minutes D'Artagnan was recovering his breath, he reflected that he had a very difficult part to play. It was necessary that he always should question and never reply. By the time his respiration returned, he had fixed his plans for the campaign. Chapter 70, wherein the ideas of D'Artagnan begin to clear up a little. D'Artagnan immediately took the offensive. Now that I have told you all, dear friend, or rather you have guessed all, tell me what you are doing here, covered with dust and mud? Porthos wiped his brow and looked around him with pride. Why, it appears, said he, that you may see what I am doing here. No doubt, you lift great stones. Oh, to show these idle fellows what a man is, said Porthos with contempt. But you understand. Yes, that is not your place to lift stones, although there are many whose place it is who cannot lift them as you do. It was that which made me ask you just now. What are you doing here, Baron? I am studying topography, Chevalier. You are studying topography? Yes, but you, what are you doing in that common dress? D'Artagnan perceived he had committed a fault in giving expression to his astonishment. Porthos had taken advantage of it to retort with a question. Why, said he, you know I am a bourgeois in fact. My dress then has nothing astonishing in it, since it conforms with my condition. Nonsense. You are a musketeer. You are wrong, my friend. I have given in my resignation. Bah. Oh mon Dieu. Yes. And you have abandoned the service? I have quitted it. You have abandoned the king? Quite. Porthos raised his arms towards heaven, like a man who has heard extraordinary news. Well, that does confound me, said he. It is nevertheless true. And what led you to form such a resolution? The king displeased me. Mazarin had disgusted me for a long time, as you know, so I threw my cassock to the nettles. But Mazarin is dead. I know that well enough, parbleu. Only at the period of his death, my resignation had been given in and accepted 2 months. Then, feeling myself free, I set off for Pierrefonds, to see my friend Porthos. I had heard talk of the happy division you had made of your time, and I wished for a fortnight to divide mine after your fashion. My friend, you know that it is not for a fortnight my house is open to you. It is for a year, for 10 years, for life. Thank you, Porthos. But perhaps you want money, do you? Said Porthos, making something like 50 louis chink in his pocket. In that case, you know. No, thank you, I am not in want of anything. I placed my savings with Planchet, who pays me the interest of them. Your savings? Yes, to be sure, said D'Artagnan. Why should I not put by my savings as well as another, Porthos? Oh, there is no reason why. On the contrary, I always suspected you, that is to say, Aramis always suspected you to have savings. For my own part, DC, I take no concern about the management of my household, but I presume the savings of a musketeer must be small. No doubt relative to yourself, Porthos, who are a millionaire, but you shall judge. I had laid by 25,000 livres. That's pretty well, said Porthos with an affable air. And, continued D'Artagnan, on the 28th of last month I added to it 200,000 livres more. Porthos opened his large eyes, which eloquently demanded of the musketeer, where the devil did you steal such a sum as that, my dear friend? 200,000 livres, cried he at length. Yes, which, with the 25 I had and 20,000 I have about me, complete the sum of 245,000 livres. But tell me whence comes this fortune? I will tell you all about it presently, dear friend, but as you have, in the first place, many things to tell me yourself, let us have my recital in its proper order. Bravo, said Porthos, then we are both rich. But what can I have to relate to you? You have to relate to me how Aramis came to be named. Ah, Bishop of Vannes. That's it, said D'Artagnan, Bishop of Vannes. Dear Aramis, do you know how he succeeded so well? Yes, without reckoning that he does not mean to stop there. What? Do you mean he will not be contented with violet stockings, and that he wants a red hat? Hush! That is promised him. Bah! By the king? By somebody more powerful than the king. Ah! The devil! Porthos, what incredible things you tell me, my friend! Why incredible? Is there not always somebody in France more powerful than the king? Oh yes, in the time of King Louis XIII. It was Cardinal Richelieu. In the time of the Regency it was Cardinal Mazarin. In the time of Louis XIV, it is M. Go on. It is M. Fouquet. Jove, you have hit it the first time. So, then, I suppose it is M. Fouquet who has promised Aramis the red hat. Porthos assumed an air of reserve. Dear friend, said he, God preserve me from meddling with the affairs of others, above all from revealing secrets it may be to their interest to keep. When you see Aramis, he will tell you all he thinks he ought to tell you. You are right, Porthos, and you are quite a padlock for safety. But to revert to yourself. Yes, said Porthos. You said just now you came hither to study topography? I did so. To do? My friend, what fine things you will do. How do you mean? Why, these fortifications are admirable. Is that your opinion? Decidedly it is. In truth, to anything but a regular siege, Belle-Isle is absolutely impregnable. Porthos rubbed his hands. That is my opinion, said he. But who the devil has fortified this paltry little place in this manner? Porthos drew himself up proudly. Did I not tell you who? No. Do you not suspect? No. All I can say is that he is a man who has studied all the systems, and who appears to me to have stopped at the best. Hush, said Porthos. Consider my modesty, my dear D'Artagnan. In truth, replied the Musketeer, can it be you, who, oh, pray, my dear friend? You who have imagined, traced, and combined between these bastions, these redans, these curtains, these half-moons, and are preparing that covered way? I beg you. You who have built that lunette with its retiring angles and its salient edges? My friend. You who have given that inclination to the openings of your embrasures, by means of which you so effectively protect the men who serve the guns? Mon Dieu. Yes. Oh, Porthos, I must bow down before you, I must admire you, but you have always concealed from us this superb, this incomparable genius. I hope, my dear friend, you will show me all this in detail. Nothing more easy. Here lies my original sketch, my plan. Show it me. Porthos led D'Artagnan towards the stone that served him for a table, and upon which the plan was spread. At the foot of the plan was written, in the formidable writing of Porthos, writing of which we have already had occasion to speak. Instead of making use of the square or rectangle as has been done to this time, you will suppose your place enclosed in a regular hexagon, this polygon having the advantage of offering more angles than the quadrilateral one. Every side of your hexagon, of which you will determine the length in proportion to the dimensions taken upon the place, will be divided into two parts, and upon the middle point you will elevate a perpendicular towards the center of the polygon, which will equal in length the sixth part of the side. By the extremities of each side of the polygon, you will trace two diagonals, which will cut the perpendicular. These will form the precise lines of your defense. The devil, said D'Artagnan, stopping at this point of the demonstration. Why, this is a complete system, Porthos. Entirely, said Porthos. Continue. No, I have read enough of it. But since it is you, my dear Porthos, who direct the works, what need have you of setting down your system so formally in writing? Oh, my dear friend, death. How? Death. Why, we are all mortal, are we not? That is true, said D'Artagnan. You have a reply for everything, my friend. And he replaced the plan upon the stone. But however short the time he had the plan in his hands, D'Artagnan had been able to distinguish, under the enormous writing of Porthos, a much more delicate hand, which reminded him of certain letters to Marie Michon, with which he had been acquainted in his youth. Only the India-rubber had passed and repassed so often over this writing that it might have escaped a less practiced eye than that of our Musketeer. Bravo! My friend, bravo, said D'Artagnan. And now you know all that you want to know, do you not? Said Porthos, wheeling about. Mordioux. Yes, only do me one last favor, dear friend. Speak, I am master here. Do me the pleasure to tell me the name of that gentleman who is walking yonder. Where there? Behind the soldiers. Followed by a lackey? Exactly. In company with a mean sort of fellow dressed in black? Yes, I mean him. That is M. Guittard. And who is Guittard, my friend? He is the architect of the house. Of what house? Of M. Fouquet's house. Ah, cried D'Artagnan, you are of the household of M. Fouquet then, Porthos? What do you mean by that? Said the topographer, blushing to the top of his ears. Why, you say the house, when speaking of Belle-Isle, as if you were speaking of the chateau of Pierrefonds. Porthos bit his lip. Belle-Isle, my friend, said he, belongs to M. Fouquet, does it not? Yes, I believe so. As Pierrefonds belongs to me? I told you I believed so, there are no two words to that. Did you ever see a man there who is accustomed to walk about with a ruler in his hand? No, but I might have seen him there if he really walked there. Well, that gentleman is M. Bullingrin. Who is M. Bullingrin? Now we are coming to it. If, when this gentleman is walking with a ruler in his hand, anyone should ask me, who is M. Bullingrin? I should reply, he is the architect of the house. Well, Guitard is the Bullingrin of M. Fouquet. But he has nothing to do with the fortifications which are my department alone. Do you understand? Mine, absolutely mine. Porthos, cried D'Artagnan, letting his arms fall as a conquered man gives up his sword. Ah, my friend, you are not only a Herculean topographer, you are, still further, a dialectician of the first water. Is it not powerfully reasoned? Said Porthos, and he puffed and blew like the conger which D'Artagnan had let slip from his hand. And now, said D'Artagnan, that shabby-looking man who accompanies M. Guitard, is he also of the household of M. Fouquet? Oh, yes, said Porthos with contempt, it is one M. Jupinet or Jupinet, a sort of poet. Who is come to establish himself here? I believe so. I thought M. Fouquet had poets enough yonder, Scudery, Lauret, Polisson, La Fontaine. If I must tell you the truth, Porthos, that poet disgraces you. My friend, but what saves us is that he is not here as a poet. As what then is he? As printer. And you make me remember, I have a word to say to the quaestor. Say it then. Porthos made a sign to Jupinet, who perfectly recollected D'Artagnan, and did not care to come nearer, which naturally produced another sign from Porthos. This was so imperative he was obliged to obey. As he approached, "Come hither," said Porthos. "You only landed yesterday and you have begun your tricks already." "How so, Monsieur le Baron?" asked Jupinet, trembling. "Your press was groaning all night, monsieur," said Porthos, "and you prevented my sleeping, corne de boeuf." "Monsieur," objected Jupinet timidly, "you have nothing yet to print, therefore you have no occasion to set your press going. What did you print last night?" "Monsieur, a light poem of my own composition." "Light? No, no, monsieur," the press groaned pitifully beneath it. "Let it not happen again. Do you understand?" "Yes, monsieur." "You promise me?" "I do, monsieur." "Very well, this time I pardon you. Adieu." The poet retreated as humbly as he had approached. "Well, now we have combed that fellow's head, let us breakfast." "Yes," replied D'Artagnan, "let us breakfast." "Only," said Porthos, "I beg you to observe, my friend, that we only have 2 hours for our repast." "What would you have?" "We will try to make 2 hours suffice." "But why have you only 2 hours?" "Because it is high tide at 1 o'clock, and with the tide I am going to Vinnes." "But as I shall return tomorrow, my dear friend, you can stay here. You shall be master. I have a good cook and a good cellar." "No," interrupted D'Artagnan, "better than that." "What? You are going to Vinnes, you say?" "To a certainty." "To see Aramis?" "Yes." "Well, I came from Paris on purpose to see Aramis." "That's true." "I will go with you then." "Do, that's the thing. Only I ought to have seen Aramis first and you after. But man proposes and God disposes. I have begun with you and will finish with Aramis." "Very well. And in how many hours can you go from here to Vinnes?" "Oh, pardieu, in 6 hours. 3 hours by sea to Sarzeau, 3 hours by road from Sarzeau to Vinnes." "How convenient that is, being so near to the bishopric. Do you often go to Vinnes?" "Yes, once a week." "But stop till I get my plan." Porthos picked up his plan, folded it carefully, and engulfed it in his large pocket. "Good," said D'Artagnan aside. "I think I now know the real engineer who is fortifying Belle Isle." 2 hours after, at high tide, Porthos and D'Artagnan set out for Sarzeau.